Welcome to this Learn by Video course. My name is Candace Mars, and I'll be your guide through learning the features of dynamic web development with Dreamweaver and also the PHP environment. We're going to be using Dreamweaver, and we're going to be working in creating web pages using PHP. Moving from static pages to dynamic web development can be a tricky process, and I'm here to assist you and also show you how Dreamweaver can help you create your dynamic web pages. This course is for anyone who's worked in basic web pages, specifically the static version. We're going to be working with dynamic web pages, pulling data from a database, and I'm going to show you all the exciting features that Dreamweaver offers that you may never have seen. Things such as the database's binding and server behaviors panel. So I'm excited to introduce you to the world of dynamic web development. Let's get started. In this Learn by Video course, we're going to be working in a complete server environment and also in Dreamweaver. In order to work in a server environment, we must install one. So what we're going to be doing is going through the installation of MAMP on the Mac side and XAMPP on the PC side. What these allow you to do is install your web server, PHP, and the database all in one install. This is much easier than it used to be when each one of those individual pieces had to be installed separately, and then you had to go in and configure them to talk to one another. So I think you'll find MAMP and XAMPP are very nice environments in order to work with for your dynamic websites. Just as a suggestion, if everything in this course is new to you, you may want to just go through the movie watching it with me while I do everything for you so you can get the concepts. Then you can go ahead and walk through it all, setting it all up on your system. So let's get started setting up our testing environment so we can get creating dynamic websites. So what exactly do we need in order to create our development environment for dynamic websites? And the first thing we need is a server environment. We'll be looking at MAMP on the Mac side and XAMPP on the PC side as our development environments. But what I'd like to do is give you an idea of the dynamic process in general before we do that. So basically, this slide shows you this is a static page request. You just need a client computer accessing a web server. These can be one and the same machines. Notice I have two separate ones here. I have our very old machine with floppies in it, just for history's sake. Now, in order to add the dynamic environment, we add this piece on the right-hand side. So this is our dynamic request environment we're going to be setting up. So we need a database if we're going to pull data out of a database. We need some kind of a server-side language because that server-side language is what talks to the database for us. Everything runs through that server-side processing in order to access the database. Then we also need a web server to take the requests from the user over on this side and send them off for processing by the server-side language and send them back to the user for viewing. So all four of these pieces are required for dynamic development. And that's why, since this is a bit more complicated than the static side, that's why this course was created, to assist you in making that leap from the blue area to the tan side. And what we're going to be doing is working in a PHP environment using an Apache web server and MySQL database. And we're using MAMP or XAMPP to do that because all three of these can be installed in one process. So let's get on with the installation of what we need in order to get creating web pages using Dreamweaver. What we are now going to do is install the testing environment for this course. That testing environment is going to be a product called XAMPP. And what this is an open source product that includes everything you need to install the testing server environment in one installation. The reason I'm directing you to my site, you'll see in just a moment. And it's because Windows 7 and XAMPP version 1.7.4, which is the present version as of right now, does have an issue with Windows 7. So I've provided you a link to the prior version, which has no issues. So XAMPP 1.7.3, as of the release right now, is the latest version that works with Windows 7 without any issues. So if you click on that link, it will take you to a zip file, and that zip file allows you to download the prior version 1.7.3. So go ahead and do that one if you're on Windows 7. If you're on anything but Windows 7, feel free to use the latest version. Your version of XAMPP really makes no difference. Everything's included in this, so even if you're using a much older version of XAMPP, you should have no issues in terms of having it include everything you need. So what XAMPP does is include MySQL and PHP, as well as the Apache server. Now, I have already downloaded this, so let's go through the install of XAMPP for Windows. And this is the 1.7.3 version. What they did in 1.7.4 is they made the last part of the install a little bit easier. So if you do end up using 1.7.4 or later, you won't have to do the last few pieces we are going to be doing in 1.7.3. So this really is just a wizard that walks you through the installation process. So I'll click Install. I will allow this. That's a user account confirmation from Windows 7. And it is a lot of files. You can see XAMPP PHP, there's Perl, there's MySQL, there's Zend. There's all kinds of different products wrapped up into one nice and easy install with XAMPP. So it's a great product. You'll get familiar with controlling both the database and the web server. When we do this install, we are not installing it as a Windows service, so there's a little separate control panel you use to turn this on and off. It's my preference to do it that way. Working with the panel is easier to turn this on and off, and you may not always want to have your server running when you start up your machine. So that's why we're going to do a basic install. Now at the end of this install, because this is 1.7.3, there are some command line prompts that you will need to use, and we'll walk through those in just a minute once this is completed the install. Pair, which you see kind of rolling past you really quickly there, is another library you can use to work with PHP. Perl is an actual programming language. It's a very old programming language prior to server-side scripts and server-side languages. Perl was used to create CGI scripts to do the same process. Now most people tend to use a server-side language, but the Perl libraries are available to you, and a few of these services built into XAMPP do use those. So we'll give this another minute or so. Almost done. And we'll take a look at what this process does. Now we're going to move into some command line prompts, so I'll walk you through how to answer those as well. So we are just about done. It's amazing how many files this installs. So here's our command line prompts I was mentioning to you. Move this down so you can see it a little easier. So, should I add shortcuts? Yes or no? I definitely want a shortcut on my desktop to be able to get to the control panel. So you can see default is Y, so just hit Enter. Should I proceed? Absolutely. We will keep it at the Y default and just hit Enter. Now this is the part that tends to confuse people without drive letters. And what we want to do is change this to yes. So hit the Y key to change it to Y. These are all just yes/no questions, so it really is pretty simple. I'll show you why we do this. This gives you the control panel for controlling the process of your web server and the PHP portion along with the database. So we're going to say Y and hit Enter. It looks like there's a big deal going on, but don't let that throw you. We're just not using it as a built-in service with Windows. We're installing it separately. So press return to continue. This is set to Europe. That's fine, whatever your time zone is, if you want to use it. This picks up on wherever you're located. So if I'm in the US, it picks up on whatever time zone I'm in the US as well. So I'll just hit return. Now what we want to do is start the control panel. So I'll put the number 1 and hit enter. And there's my control panel. Now we're going to exit by hitting the letter X. Now X actually closed that up, so let me hit X one more time and return. Now XAMPP does have a website of its own, but as you can see, you're downloading the version that has some issues with Windows 7. So that's why we went out to my website to do this. So we'll close that up. And here is my XAMPP control panel. Now what I'm going to do is run this. I'm going to right-click and say Run as Administrator. This makes sure that there are no permissions issues when you go to run the actual server. I'll hit yes to that prompt, and here is my control panel. And we're going to talk about this control panel in another movie, but this is how you turn on and off your web server and the database portion. It's also how you administer this portion. We now have XAMPP installed. You can see it's a very simple process. Those prompts at the end in prior versions, you will get prompted for those same prompts. Any version later than this one we're using, 1.7.3, they've eliminated the prompts at the end, and it automatically does exactly what we did using the prompts. So let's get started working in XAMPP. We are now going to take a look at installing MAMP on the Mac side. And what I have is the MAMP website right here. And on the home page, there is a download area. What we want is MAMP. So you want to click this Download Now link, and we'll get that particular download onto our website. So once that's complete, we can double-click this, and you will need to agree to the license. So I'll close up the website. We'll click Agree, and it will take you to this interface here. And within this interface, we're going to click on MAMP, and we're going to drag it into Applications. And it should copy over, and that should take care of installing MAMP. So we'll give that a second to install. So the MAMP icon is located inside your Applications folder. So I can click to open up the applications, and here is MAMP. If I open that up, inside of MAMP is the htdocs folder, and this is where our chapter files are going to go. I do have the course files right here, the unique VAC folder, and I'll drag those into the htdocs area. So now I've installed my course files. I've also installed MAMP. So if I go down to the MAMP icon, I will open this up, and we now have MAMP available, and we'll launch MAMP. You should see the Welcome to MAMP folder here. I'll close this one up, and here we are. Now this is how we actually administer and view information from the Mac side. The interface within the database is exactly the same interface as the PC side. So we go through creating a new database in the database setup. That's a separate movie. You will see slightly different tables in the left-hand side, or databases. So if I click on this one as an example, this is the Performance Schema database. And this drop-down is all of the databases available. You can see when we installed MAMP, we got 3 databases installed along with all of the installation of all of the other files. We're not going to worry about these. What we're going to do is actually install our own. To get to the home page for PHPMyAdmin, you'll click this little home button. So we now have MAMP installed. The distinction between MAMP and XAMPP is by default, MAMP adds the semicolon 8888. What that means is MAMP is operating on port 8888. So anytime you reference your website, you will need to add this port number. So for this course on the Mac side, You will always have to add this particular port. This is the default version, and I think it's easiest just to work within this particular version. The reason MAMP installs on this port is because the Mac side also has a built-in Apache server, and you are better off not using that server. If you did use it, it does not have a full-fledged PHP environment built into it, and you also do not automatically get all of the MySQL pieces. So it's really best to use MAMP, and I thought it easiest if we just set it up on the default port. So when you go in Dreamweaver to set up your testing server area, you will need to add :8888 to your environment. So that's the only distinction between the Mac and PC side moving forward. So you can go ahead and move out to MAMP. You can access it. Here is the elephant that represents MAMP. So that's all there is to installing MAMP on the Mac side. What I want to do is walk you through the steps of setting up the testing server on the Mac side. Because we need to add the port number in the testing server area, I thought I would walk you through that step. I also want to show you this is the MAMP control panel. And right now I know my servers are on because they have a green light. If I click Stop Servers, that will turn them off, and you can see they turn to a red light. So that's how you turn on the web server and MySQL on the Mac side. Just click Start Servers or Stop Servers. Pretty easy to do that. Now let's move out to the Dreamweaver side. And in the Dreamweaver side, let's set up your website. Now, I do go through the course setup, at least the basic setup, not the testing server piece, in the book chapter on Dreamweaver. So you may have already set this up, but we're going to walk through the entire process to make sure it's clear to you. So we're going to set up our site as Unique Vacations. In the local site folder, I'm going to go out to the htdocs folder inside of MAMP. Now to get to MAMP, I go out to Applications. When I scroll through the list, here is MAMP, and the htdocs folder is where I placed my course files. So that's the folder I want to choose. Now I'll move over to the servers area, and this is where we define our testing server. So I'll click Add New Server here. This is going to be my testing server. You just need to give it a name. That name actually shows up in this next interface area, and I can't move this over to show you that, so I'll show it to you at the end. Here's our local network. The server folder is that same one we chose before. Applications. We scroll down to MAMP. We want htdocs, and we want Unique Vacations. So we'll choose that folder. This is the piece that's different. This is really the only different piece on the PC other than the folder where that htdocs is stored. And we're going to set up localhost :8888 / QUE vacations. There we go. So that is the only distinction, this little piece here. In addition to basic localhost, anytime you're referencing this information in your browser, you need to add this. What we're doing is telling Dreamweaver to do that for us, so anytime we preview pages directly from Dreamweaver, we don't have to worry about it. I'll click Save. This is going to be our testing server, not our remote server, so we'll click Save, and I will click Done. The last piece of what we need to do in terms of setting up our files is to just test a page and make sure that it works. So I'm going to go down to URL click in my Files panel. This page has some PHP installed on it. You can see I do have some red PHP code, and that's what we want. We want to make sure that our PHP is working, and what you can see is that we're actually pulling in the header for our website. So far so good. It looks like things are working. Let's double check it in the browser just to make sure, and there it is. So you can see the local host, because we plugged it into Dreamweaver, it really isn't a big deal unless you're going out to the browser separately outside of Dreamweaver. then you would need to type this in. Otherwise, you can just preview in browser in Dreamweaver. So if I click on cat, it's a cat. And that's a matter of our files specifically. So we know PHP is working. I was able to view that page. So our setup is all set. So that is installing MAMP, setting it up in Dreamweaver, setting up our course files into the htdocs folder, and actually turning on our servers and making sure that PHP is working correctly. So on the Mac side, we are all set to move forward. Let's now take a look at the XAMPP control panel and working with XAMPP. When we installed it, I'm assuming you've gone through the installation movie, specifically for the Windows side. The Mac side, I do have a separate movie for installing MAMP, but the control panel works the same whatever system you're in. There are a couple of things with regards to the control panel on the Windows side, so I'll show you that piece at this point. The XAMPP control panel is installed as a shortcut. When we walk through the installation, we were prompted, at least in version 1.7.3 and earlier, to determine if we want to put a shortcut on the desktop, which I did. In order to avoid issues, if you right-click, you can run as administrator. Now, I haven't usually had to do this, but should you have Windows permissions issues, feel free to right-click, run as administrator, and that should take care of those issues. So I will go ahead and choose that. It's going to prompt me to allow this, and I'll say yes. And here's the control panel. Now, in order to turn the web server on, notice it's not turned on. The start button is active. So this does not automatically turn it on when you start up your system. Since I tend to work between web servers and between technologies, I don't always want every web server on my computer turned on. So this allows me to turn it on and off very easily, and we'll go ahead and start that up. Once I click Start, I should see the word Running highlighted in green. The other piece I will see is the XAMPP control panel down in this area. And this is how I can get to this control panel. So the first time you start it up in any given session, it will install it down here in this area, down by your clock, and you can open it up and close it that way. Now, if you click this Start button and Apache does not show running, and you have Skype installed, there is an issue with regards to Skype, and it's a very simple fix, but if you weren't aware of it, it's really frustrating. So I'll show you the screen in Skype. So if you have Skype installed on your machine, by default, Skype will interfere with Apache starting. So go out to the Skype options area. So you go in the Skype menu, go to Tools, and go down to Options. Select the Advanced area, the one with the little gear in front of it, and click on Connection. And all you need to do is uncheck this checkbox, and then you have no more issues. So this is in the connection area within the advanced section of Skype in the Tools options. And it's that simple to fix that issue. So you can certainly use Skype with XAMPP installed and Apache. It's not a problem. You just need to uncheck that checkbox. Now I'm going to start MySQL. This is the database piece, and you should get running next to both of them. What I'm going to do next is click the admin button. When I click that, it takes me out to the home page for XAMPP. We are installed based on localhost. So this is actually the XAMPP website on our local system. I'll click English, and you should see you've successfully installed XAMPP. So I now know it's running. That's all we need to do. So I don't have to be concerned about that piece. This next piece here, MySQL, we'll be setting that up and have a separate movie to pull in the database information. So we'll be taking a look at that in another movie. So this is how you control your web server and the database. It's a pretty simple process. You turn it on, and you can just click the stop button when you want to turn it off. You do get a message about what's going on. You can see Apache is stopped now, and MySQL is now stopped. The green running button disappears, and we're back with the start button showing. So it's pretty easy to tell if it's turned on or not. So each time you want to use this web server, you do need to come in and manually turn it on, but this gives you a lot of control, and it's very easy once those are turned on to get into administering those areas. So that's the XAMPP control panel. And I think you'll agree XAMPP is a very simple way to install all kinds of technologies in one install, and it's very easy to work with it due to this control panel. If you are working on the Mac side, what you do is install MAMP, and here's an example of what the MAMP interface looks like. Here's the Apache server and MySQL server, so you can see these two are very similar. This is an example of the servers running, so you get a green dot on the MAMP side, whereas once the servers are running on the PC side, you just get green text. So a subtle difference between the two interfaces, but I will be addressing the installation of MAMP and working with this panel in the Mac side movie for installing MAMP. But just so even you PC side folks can see that when you install it, there are a lot of similarities between the two systems, whichever one you install. So if I wanted to stop these on the Mac side, I just click Stop Servers here. So that is the installation of XAMPP. You can see it's quite an easy process, and we'll be turning that on and off. So make sure prior to working with any of the movies within this course from this point on that you turn XAMPP on in order to run the web server and the database prior to actually trying to work within the course files. We're now going to install the course files, and there's a subtle difference between the Mac side and the PC side in this area, but once we get inside a single folder, it's identical. So on the PC side, XAMPP installs itself the default installation if you followed the same installation instructions as installing XAMPP within this course. It's on the C drive, and XAMPP gets installed in its own folder on C drive. If you're on the Mac side, MAMP gets installed inside your Applications folder by default, and that's where we placed it in the Installing MAMP on the Mac side movie. So if you haven't done both of those, make sure you go through either the XAMPP installation or the MAMP installation movie. So if I open up XAMPP or MAMP in the Applications folder, double-click that to open it, both server environments, XAMPP and MAMP, work the same from here on in. Once you find their folder, inside of that there's an htdocs folder, and that is where we want to place our course files. So what I'm going to do is I have my Unique Vacations course files. I'm simply going to drag it over here to copy it into the htdocs folder. This is where you put your individual websites that you want to view inside of XAMPP or MAMP. The folder is the same. It's the htdocs folder inside of either the XAMPP folder on the C drive or the MAMP folder on the Mac. We've now installed our website. Now inside this folder, you should see a bunch of files such as these, and those are the files we'll be working with throughout the course. We will also be creating some new files moving forward. Now the last piece we need to do is we need to install the database itself. So I can close up XAMPP, at least the XAMPP folder or the MAMP folder, and there is a file in your course files called uniquedb.sql, and that's what we need to pull into the MySQL database area. So to control that, I can open up the control panel, say yes. Now, should you get this error, I want to show you what this means. What we actually have is the control panel is also running in the background. So I'll say OK, and in my system, I have this running. I can see it down in the right-hand corner, close to the clock. So I can access it this way. So should you get that error when clicking the desktop, don't get concerned. It just means your control panel has already been activated on your system. So I'll go ahead and click Start for both of these. Now on the MAMP side, that Start button looks a little bit different, and this interface looks a little bit different. I cover that in the MAMP installation movie. So you want to start your web server, And I'm going to click to the right of MySQL is an admin button. I need to get to the administrative area for the database. So I'll click that. And here is my administrative area for our database. It's a GUI called phpMyAdmin. And you can see each one of these is an individual database. So once we create ours, it will be listed in the left-hand side. So I'm going to go out to the Create New Database section right here, and I'm going to create a new database called Unique. Once I plug that in there, that is going to be the name that will show up in the left-hand side once I've created this. Now we're going to click Create right here. Once I click this Create button, it's going to create a new database, but there will be no data inside of it. So I'll click Create. Notice it says no tables found in the database. This 0 means the number of tables. It simply created a blank database for us to work with. Now what I need to do is go out and pull in all the information inside this SQL file. So we'll do that next. I'm going to go over to Structure. Now, if I wanted to individually create these tables, I could do them one at a time in this manner. I actually have the entire database set up for you in this file, so all we need to do is import this file and all of the tables and data get imported with it. We just needed to create the database itself manually. So I'm going to go out to Import, and what I do in this section is show it where this text file is located. So I'll click Browse. Wherever you have your course files and this file located, that's where you want to browse to at this point. I'm going to browse out to the desktop. And on the desktop, I have my unique_db.sql. Now this is a .sql file. It's a file that stores all of our database information. So we don't have to worry about what's actually inside of this. The file will take care of everything for you. So I will click Open right here. And all I need to do now is click the Go button down in the bottom right. Now you'll see when I have the unique database here, these are the individual tables within the database. If I click on a table, it shows me the information inside of the database. And the way you control what you're seeing is through all of these individual tabs. And we don't have to work too much inside this database. We're going to be pulling data out of this database, and we'll be creating a little admin area as well. So here is our database. It's all set up for us, and we're all set in regards to that. Now what we need to do is make Dreamweaver aware of all of this information, and we're set to go and develop our web pages. So it's as easy as that to create a database. I have the SQL file all set for you, so you just need to import it. So that's how you set up the database and install the website within your web server. I think you'll see this is a fairly simple process. It looks daunting when you open the interface, but once you walk through it a couple of times, it's really a very simple process. So let's get started creating web pages. We are now going to take a look at setting up the testing server in Dreamweaver. Now, I don't have the course files installed in Dreamweaver at this point. If you have been through the book chapter on Dreamweaver, there are screenshots showing you how to install those course files, but I thought I would do it very quickly here in order to set it up on my system so you can see it in action. But if you need more details, because I will go through this very quickly, you will want to go out and take a look at the book chapters. So I'm going to go to the Manage Sites interface. I'm going to click the New button, and this website is going to be called Unique Vacations. And I will go ahead and make this a capital. Now this site name is what you see in the Dreamweaver menu right here. I'm going to browse out to my files, and this will go into the C drive, the XAMPP folder, if you're on the PC side, Or if you're on the Mac side, you'll go out to your Applications folder and go into the MAMP folder. And inside of both of these testing server environments, we have a htdocs folder. And I'm going to browse out to my course files. We move these into this area in a separate movie. So here's my Unique Vacations folder. I'll select that folder. Make sure that folder is showing down in the lower area here, because this is actually what gets registered in Dreamweaver. Click Select or Choose. So I'm on the C drive, XAMPP folder, htdocs on the PC, or on the Mac side, this would be the Applications area, the MAMP folder, htdocs. Now we're going to move into setting up the testing server area. So if you already had your course files set up, where you would be, I'll save this information, is you need to get back to the Manage Sites area. You can use the Site Manage Sites up here, or you can use the drop-down in the Files panel. Both of those get you to the same location. I'll select my website and click Edit. So here is where we left off. Now I'm going to go into the Servers area and set up our local testing server. In order to create a new server or make Dreamweaver aware of it, I'm going to click the plus button down at the bottom left. And this we're going to call our testing server. In this version of Dreamweaver, you give this server a name. If you're using a prior version, prior to Dreamweaver CS5, this interface will look a little bit different, but the concept is the same. You just won't have to give your server a name. So we're going to connect using the local network. Notice my options changed. And the server folder we're going to use, I'm going to browse out to the C drive XAMPP folder, htdocs, Unique Vacations, or on the Mac side, this would be the Applications area, MAMP, htdocs, Unique Vacations. So I'll make sure I've chosen that particular folder. Now, in the web URL, in the Mac installation movie, I'll be showing you the situation with the web URL. On the PC side, we're going to use localhost /unique vacations /. On the Mac side, you may need to use a port number here after localhost, but I'll talk about that in the MAMP installation movie. So go ahead and watch that. If this does not work on the Mac side, you will need to add another port number. So I'll click the Advanced tab, and what we need to do is tell Dreamweaver what testing server language we're going to be using. So this drop-down here shows you the various options that are available. You can work with any of these server-side languages within Dreamweaver. We're going to choose the bottom one, PHP MySQL. And that is all we need to do. We can click the Save button. So what we just did was we made Dreamweaver aware of where our testing server is located. In other words, we're telling Dreamweaver XAMPP is our web server. We're also setting this up as a local connection, and I'm going to check both of these checkboxes. This is our remote testing server, and it's a testing server specifically. Now, I could uncheck this, and that's just telling Dreamweaver, okay, that's where our PHP testing environment is located. So there's a couple of options here, and part of that determines if you have to upload every file each time. So let's go ahead and uncheck remote. This is more if you're working in an FTP environment, where you have to upload to a completely separate server. For our development environment, I'm just going to set it up as a testing server. I will click Save. Now this message here in Dreamweaver tells you that Dreamweaver is storing that testing server information. Every time we open this website in Dreamweaver, it will be available. So this is simply saying, okay, Dreamweaver's saving our testing server information, so we don't have to keep entering it. Now I'll click Done. And we've now made Dreamweaver aware of the fact that we're using PHP and where our web server is located. We'll be working in a few of the panels to show these particular features moving forward. I'm going to double-click the Styles panel. just double-click the word CSS styles and double-click databases. There we go. And I don't have a file open right now, so this is grayed out. But you'll see this area is going to look a little bit different as we move forward. This is where we'll set up our database connection within Dreamweaver, and we'll set that up in a different movie. So we'll be moving into working in these 3 tabs throughout the course. For now, we've just made Dreamweaver aware of our testing environment. We will use another movie to confirm that it's all working correctly. So we finished setting up our testing server in Dreamweaver. We are now going to take a look at how to create a PHP page and what the difference is between an HTML page and a PHP page. So I'm going to start by working with a new HTML page. So I'll just click Create New HTML in this welcome screen. This is known as the welcome screen. So I'll click Create New HTML. Within this page, I'm going to say Hello World. That's a bit of a programming joke. The first page you do in a new language, you usually end up printing out Hello World. So I'll do the same. I'm going to do a file save as and save this one as HTML.html. We'll click Save. So I now have an HTML page called HTML. So if I go out to my interface here, you'll see it is listed in my Files panel. So I'm going to close it up in the document window. Now I can go out to this page and simply delete the HTML extension and add a PHP extension. It's as simple as that to create a PHP page. There is no distinct difference. The only difference between a PHP page and an HTML page is a PHP page may or may not contain PHP coding. So I'll open this page up. If we go up to the globe here, or select F12, or Control F12 on the Windows side, I'll click Preview in Firefox. You can see, even though this is a PHP page, it makes absolutely no difference. I can preview this information here. So let's do a test adding some PHP coding. Now, when you install Dreamweaver and begin working with the PHP website, you get an extra tab up here, which is the PHP tab. And within this tab, we can use it. I'll just add an extra space. And in order to add PHP to your page, within this tab, I click this left angle bracket question mark. And what that is a code block. And you can see in Dreamweaver it shows up in red to make it easier for you to see the PHP code versus the HTML code. Now what I would do is start typing and add some PHP code in that area. Now I will go out and save this page, preview it in the browser. You can see it doesn't look any different. And if I go out to View Page Source or View Source, notice there is no PHP coding whatsoever. What happens is the PHP coding that you put in between those PHP code blocks, the section that turns red in Dreamweaver, none of that coding will show up in the final version that your user will see, even if they view source. So all PHP is stripped out that you might add, including any comments in PHP you might add. But that is the difference between HTML and PHP page. What the PHP extension does is tell PHP to process everything between these tags on a basic HTML page. When it's sent to the browser, all of that PHP is stripped out, so the user only sees the final page. That is why you cannot view any PHP code through View Source out on the web. The only thing you can see is the HTML, JavaScript, or CSS pieces. The PHP will not show up in that area. So it's as simple as that to create a PHP page. Just give it a .php extension. As long as the testing environment or development environment or even your final environment is set up for PHP, PHP will process whatever is between the PHP code blocks. We're now going to take a look at how to create a PHP page and work with a variable within PHP. So what we're going to do is create a blank PHP page. And since we have this welcome screen open, we can do it by clicking Create New. The other way you can create a new PHP page is by going to File, New, choose Blank Page, PHP, None in the layout, and click Create. But that's a rather long-winded process. So what I have done is change the preferences within Dreamweaver by going to Edit Preferences on the PC side and the Dreamweaver menu to Dreamweaver Preferences on the Mac side. And I turned off the HTML default in Dreamweaver. So in the New Document category, what I've done is when you install Dreamweaver, it's set to HTML. I changed this to PHP. I also unchecked this last box. Click OK, and now I can either use Command-N on the Mac side or Control-N on the PC side to create a new page. N meaning new. So if I hit Control-N, I now have a default PHP page. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'll do a Save As. And I will save this as variables.php. Now, because I set PHP as the default extension, if I did not add .php, Dreamweaver should do it for me. So how do we create a variable in PHP? I'll put some information between the body tags here. So I'm going to make a space. And I'm going to let Dreamweaver assist me with the PHP code block. When you're new to PHP, it's very easy to get confused about this code block. So in the PHP tab, I have code block. And when you hover over it, that's what it says. We'll use that. And how do I create a variable? Just to make it more clear for you, I'm going to set up the code block this way. And we're simply going to start with the $, and I will say fname equals, and I'm going to put in my name. Now, every line of PHP needs to end in a semicolon, or you will get a PHP error. I'll do the same thing for last name. name will be consistent in my naming conventions. Now notice as I am typing this, I get this red area here, and it tells me there's a syntax error. This is new to Dreamweaver CS5 and CS 5.5. If you are using an earlier version of Dreamweaver, which is not an issue for this course at all, you just won't get this little syntax piece here. So it just won't alert you quite as easily when there's a problem. Notice once I get my double quotes in correctly, put my semicolon at the end of the line, it says no syntax errors. Now that is a nice friendly feature, really helps you notice errors before you go to preview the page. And that's new, as I mentioned, to version 5 and 5.5. So I'll do a save. And if we preview this page, I'll preview it in Firefox. You can see absolutely nothing's happened. So I really just made you do all that typing for nothing. Not really. We'll show you how to display this information. But all we did, and that display will be another movie, but all we did was store this value, both of these, as these variables. So if I use this word here on the left-hand side of the equal sign, within a PHP code block, PHP will understand that that's what I'm talking about, and it will put in whatever the name is that I've assigned right here. So we'll do the display in a separate movie, simply because I tend to run out of time in a single movie. But that is how you create a variable in PHP. And there are different types of variables. We're going to be looking at some URL and form type variables throughout this course. But for now, you simply put a $sign in front of a word. You cannot have special characters. The $sign must be at the beginning. No numbers in your variables, and that will avoid a lot of confusion. So there are some little details with regards to variables, but if you simply avoid numbers and avoid special characters, You will be much better off in the long run, at least initially when you're first starting PHP. So you'll see me use that standard consistently throughout the course. So we just defined some variables in PHP. The next step we need to do is display them or use them in some way. And that's what we'll be doing moving forward. We're now going to take a look at how to display variables that you set in PHP. So what I did was opened up displayvariables.php from your course files. And within this page, I do have some code on here. I will shrink up the panels in Dreamweaver a little bit so you can see this information a little better. I'm also going to right-click this properties area, this darker gray area, and say Close Tab Group. That's going to close up my properties area. So I can do it that way, or I can always go to Window and open and close through the window menu, whichever is easier. Now what we have on this page is a PHP code block, as you can see. We have our first name and last name defined. And I also have this line here set up to echo. And following the echo, we have double quotes with some information inside of it. Echo is how you output content to the web page. So I'm going to put 2 forward slashes in front of the word echo, and you can see it turns into an orange line. Any orange lines, that is the default look in Dreamweaver for comments in PHP. So I'm going to put 2 forward slashes there. I'll go ahead and save and preview this page. So we'll preview it, and you can see there is nothing displayed on the page. Now, if I uncomment that area, what this should do is display a sentence that says, my name is, and whatever the value of first name, which I've assigned up here. So in your example, it would be your name. In my example, it would be mine. And whatever I put in for L name right here. So whatever names you have listed should show up in that sentence. I'll go ahead and uncomment that. You can see it's no longer orange, which tells me it's actually going to output to the page. I'll go out to preview that, save the changes. I do get a prompt for that. And there is my sentence. So the word echo means print this to the page. Or at least that's how PHP understands it. So anything I want to print to the page, I use the word echo. And if it is a string, meaning it's got some text in here, along with variable names, I put it inside of double quotes. These comments I'll talk about later. But for now, all we did was output that information to the page. We displayed the values of first name and last name. So this is the variable name on the left side of the equal sign. This is its value on the right-hand side. And these lines of PHP end in a semicolon. So that's how you display information and get it output to the page by PHP. Commenting code is a very common practice if you're coming from the programming side of things. But if you have no programming experience, it's something that's somewhat foreign to get used to doing. So I wanted to devote a specific movie to talking about commenting and show you how to do it in Dreamweaver and some specific things to watch for when you are commenting code. So what I have open is display variables. And this is a page that simply sets 2 variables, one called fname and one called lname, to my name. And then it's going to output those variables in a sentence to the page. So right now, this page, if I preview it, is going to look like that. Even though it's a sentence, I probably should have a period at the end of it, but I won't worry about that right now. Now there is another way to preview pages. I'm in code view at this point, just to show you a little bit easier what's going on. But this button here, called Live View, if I click on that, you'll see what it does is keep the code on the left, and it's going to output my information. In other words, run it through the PHP processing to show you the page in PHP. So this is a quick and easy way to get a feel for what you're creating as you work in Dreamweaver. This live view speeds things up, so if I need a quick view, I can click live view. It does block a few things off you may find throughout the program, and this particular version I'm using is a little bit better that way. But in case you find yourself locked out of editing within Dreamweaver, just uncheck that code, and you'll see in Design View, it just shows you this, which is why I'm not using Design View. So I'll go back to Code View, and we'll take a look at this. Now I have some comments set up here. The comments are showing up in orange within the PHP code block. If I move these out of the PHP code block, then they would not be stripped and they'd be sitting on my web page. I'll show you what I mean by that. So they're inside my PHP code block. I'll put this out in the browser. If I go out to View Page Source, you'll see I have no comments at all in here. PHP strips those out for me. If I move these outside of the PHP code block, then PHP would ignore them. In other words, the only thing PHP worries about is what's between the opening and closing PHP tags. So if you ever happen to see your comments displaying in the browser, your PHP comments, that's why. Just move them into the PHP code block. Now, what if I wanted to comment out this line of code? The quick and easy way to do it is as long as you're in Code View, you get this coding toolbar on the left-hand side, and I can click this one. It looks like somebody talking. Click on that, and you can see there's a PHP comment right here. Now, this particular type of comment, you can see it's actually putting it inside a code block. Not necessarily what I want. So it kind of messed up my page here. So Control-Z or Command-Z will always take you backwards in Dreamweaver. And it takes you back quite a few steps. So you don't have to worry too much about making a mistake. The easiest way to comment PHP code is simply put 2 forward slashes in front of it. I can type them by hand, or I can go over to the code block here, select my line, click here, and hit this middle one. You can see it turns orange. That is a single line comment. I can also, in PHP, use this comment. You'll see it still turns orange. So there are a couple of different types of comments. To remove one, click Remove Comment. So I'll put that right back to where we started. But just to show you, it's really easy to comment out code and re-comment it. So I'll select it, click this, and you can use either one of these 2 pieces here. Those are the easiest ways to comment code. Now, it's very important to put comments in 2, 3, 6 months from now, especially when your PHP gets very complicated. You don't want to have to read through the entire page process, which might be using multiple pages, in order to figure out where the area is that you need to modify within your code. So as you're building pages, please comment your PHP code blocks. Here is an opening code block in PHP. And immediately following that, just get used to adding comments. As long as you do it right away, it's not a big deal and it will really help you in the long run. If you don't do it now and you plan to come back in and add them later, it just will never happen. So make sure you're commenting your code throughout this course. I don't have time to do that, but when you're working within PHP or any server-side language, it's a good plan. Always comment your code as you create your code blocks. So that is commenting code and how to do it, not just in PHP, but how to use Dreamweaver to do it for PHP. I want to talk about a concept that every server-side language has available to it, and that is includes. And we're going to take a look at the way PHP allows includes and how to create the code to do this. But let's talk about what an include is to begin with. So what is an include? An include is a way to take content from one page and pull it into another page. It's a way to add coding to multiple pages, and an idea for this is a header and footer page. So we can create a header page that contains all of the content we want to go in the header area of every page within our website. If we do that, all of that header content is stored inside a single file. Within that file, we can place all of the code to go up at the top in the header area. That way, moving forward, if we have an issue, or we want to add navigation, or we want to change the header image, or do whatever modifications are necessary to that header region, we can do it in one file, and all of our pages from that moment on, once we upload that new file that we're including, every page will automatically update. Because at the time the user requests the web page, PHP processes the web page, pulls in that included information, and that is what the user will see for their page request. Here's an example of how it works. Your opening page code could go here, meaning up at the top of your page, you could put your HTML code. Then below that, wherever you want your header image to show, we could include the code for the header image in that area. Then you can add your page content on that specific page, and then we can pull in the footer image. What this does is allow PHP to put the page together when the user calls the page. That way they're always getting the latest version of the page. We also have easy maintenance moving forward. We change the header page, our entire site is updated as of that point. So what we're going to do for our website is we're going to add a header and footer as an include. Now, in general, it's recommended that your includes work with visual elements, and I think you'll find that's the best situation for pulling in includes. You can put any code on an include page, but you'll find more often than not it's used for visual elements. I'm sorry about this page being a bit boring, but there was some content I wanted to pass on to you, and instead of creating all kinds of different pages, I wanted you to have it in one spot. So there are different code pieces you can add for an include in PHP. So we can use the word include. If you use the word include to pull in a file, the code will run even if there's an error. So if the page to be included cannot be found for some reason, this will continue to run. If you want to make sure that everything stops when it cannot find something, you use the word require. So we will be using just the word include within our code for our pages. Now, if we add the underscore once after either of these names, what it does is make sure that that file does not accidentally get included twice. You'll find if we're including something such as a header and footer, we usually use just the word include. If we need to include additional code for processing, an example of that would be if we needed to pull in our database connection piece, then we would use require once. We want to make sure that only gets pulled in once, just in case another page has put on some code to add that connection or include that same file. It will prevent it from causing an error if it's pulled in twice. Let's take a look at a page from our site that we can use to demonstrate this. We'll actually be doing this in a separate movie, but our About Us page here has a header up at the top and a nav bar. It also has a footer at the bottom. If we go into Code View, we have div tags within this area. So what we can do instead of actually placing all of this content on each individual page, such as this one, we can use an include and store this content on a separate page. And that's actually how we're going to be setting this up. So our About Us page, we can change to use includes instead of just having the code content on our page. So we're going to go ahead and do that. we are now going to begin to work with includes. We'll take a look at the code, and we'll also take a look at a couple of files that we will be including. So first of all, I'm going to open up template.php. And if we move over to code view, this is an example of code you can add for your include. So within this area, we have an opening and closing code block for PHP. Between our PHP code block, we have the word include. Within that area, we are including the header unique.php. So that is our header file that only has the code for the header content. Notice this is enclosed in single quotes and parentheses with a semicolon at the end. Now this is assuming these two pages are within the same site folder. If they were not, I would need to modify this. I need to make sure that the template page can locate the header unique page. We have everything in a single root folder, so this works perfectly. What we're going to do is go over to the header page now and see what content that contains. Within our header page, all we have are two divs. The first div has an ID of header and it's pulling in our image. The second div has an ID of navbar and this is pulling in all of our navigational piece. If I look at this page in design view, it will not have our coding for the CSS piece. It has the content for the page, but it does not contain content in terms of the styles for the content. The page itself is going to add the CSS for us. So we won't have any CSS sitting on this page that we're going to include other than putting our content into a div with the correct IDs, and once it's dropped onto the actual page, the CSS will automatically apply. Now we've used that same concept for the footer page. Our div is located within this area. I have an image coming in, and once this gets onto the actual page, that actual page will have the styles for this footer ID. So let's go over to the template page once again. And what we're going to do is take this page content right here with the include, and we can copy it. Now, if I go out to the About Us page and we look at the code, you will see that we have two divs, one for the header and one for the navbar. That is what I'm going to be replacing with our include code. So I will select both of those divs, opening and closing for both. I will right-click and paste my include information within this area. Now that I have that pulled onto the page, that should take care of pulling in our header for us. So you can see includes are a very nice concept and fairly easy to work with. Now what I'm going to do is replace the footer div. Since I already have that header information on my clipboard, I'll go ahead and replace that. I'll select it and hit Tab just to indent it. And instead of header down here, we are going to say footer. There we go. Let's save this page and preview it. And you can see our header content is pulled in. Our footer content is pulled in. Now we can use this same concept on our index page. We have our header div and our navbar div. I will replace that with our include for the header. Down in our footer area, I will select the opening and closing div for our footer. Paste this in. I'll go ahead and set up this code so it looks a little neater. Tab in, and this will be our footer. Now we'll save that page and preview it in the browser. Now if I take this out to the full browser, because I'm just looking at it in Dreamweaver's version using Design View, I want to make sure in the full browser this is working correctly. And it is. There's our index page. I'll go over to the About Us, which looks like it's working in Dreamweaver Design View. And here it is. So our page is all set. We've added an include. In terms of the code, you can see it really doesn't take that much code to pull in an include. You just have to know what coding is on the file to be included and how to incorporate that on this page that's going to pull it in. So that is how you use includes in PHP. We are now going to talk about something called HTML statelessness. And what this means is, within HTML, when a page request is made, everything is forgotten once that page has been sent to the client. And I'm going to use this slide to help explain that concept a little bit. And then I do have 2 pages within your site files where I can talk about this concept as well. So let's take a look at this slide first. This is off of my website, cmarscreate.com, webpagerequest.html, in case you want to look at this yourself. So the client requests a page from the web server. As soon as the server sends that request back, and it doesn't matter if it's been a database request and this web server has received that page back from PHP, or if it's just a simple page request where there isn't any PHP or database involved. The concept is the same. User requests a page. As soon as the web server sends that page back, the web server has no concept of what was on the page, any coding, everything is forgotten. A web server is kind of like Dory. If you've seen the movie Nemo, it's a good example. She has no idea what she did 2 seconds ago. That is our web server. So HTML cannot remember anything. Why is this important? It's important because when we have multiple pages that need information passed between them, we cannot rely on the web server to do any part of that for us. What we need to do is code in the process. And I'm going to use our tours page as an example of this concept. Right now, this tours page is set up to display all of our tours within the database. Now, if I put this page into the full browser, we should see a complete listing of all of the tours stored in our database. So I'll go ahead and do that and show you that piece. And here are all of our tours. Now within these tours, if I hover over each one of these, if you look down in this bottom left corner as I go over each one, you will see there is some additional information besides the tours detail page. After it says toursdetail.php, there's a question mark and it says tour ID equals, and each one of these tours has a different ID. What that allows me to do is send information from this tours page to the next page, our tours detail page, and the detail page will know which tour we're talking about that we want to display within this page. So we're able to pass information from one page to another through our hyperlink. And that extra piece added to the hyperlink is known as a query string. That is exactly how our tours is set up. So if I click on Bon Air, I'm using the same tours detail page, but it's pulling the details from the specific tour that I chose, and it's passing the tour ID. Our tours detail page is taking that tour ID, querying the database for the information about this specific tour, and populating our page with that information. If we were not passing this information to this page, the tours detail page, it would have no idea which tour the user clicked on because that was a previous page sent to the user. So we need to keep that in mind as we're coding our pages. Anything that we have on one page in terms of information, we have to make sure if another page needs it, that we get it to that second page, because the first page can't do it for you alone in HTML. So that's an idea of HTML statelessness, and it's also why it's important for us to keep that in mind when we are coding and developing our web pages. So we can get content passed between pages as we need in order to create these types of interfaces. We are going to take a look at URL variables, but before we do, I wanted to give you some basic information so that when we go to actually build a query string, you understand the different pieces of it. So what is a URL variable? It's a variable that you can attach to a hyperlink. So when the user clicks the hyperlink, the next page has access to that information. So it is a two-page process that uses a hyperlink. Generally speaking, anyway. There is another way to create these, and I'll show you that in a minute. There are 4 characters that are used within a query string: the question mark, the ampersand, the equal sign, and the plus sign. And I'm using all 4 of these in our example in the page we build. So the question mark segregates the URL from the query string. The ampersand segregates groups of information. The equal sign assigns a value to a variable, and the plus sign can be used to represent a space. And these will make more sense once we actually take a look at a query string. I have an example on this page. So what are the variable types we've looked at so far? Well, we just took a quick look at PHP variables. If you've been going through this course from the beginning, you will have worked with the first name and last name variable. But most everything we do within this course from this point on is going to be working with variables. Now, a URL variable is created and referenced using get, and it has a $sign in front of it. So I'll show you that in a minute. But a get variable is a URL variable. It's a two-page process. Somebody clicks a hyperlink or fills out a form with a method of get, and that creates this query string attached to the hyperlink. And then the second page can capture that hyperlink information and work with it. The other type of variable, which we'll look at later in the course as well, is a post type variable, and those are referenced using the word post in PHP specifically. It's a two-page process. It's created by creating a form, and the user clicks a button. That form has a method of post, and it will pass the data. And as I said in other chapters, we will be working with that particular method as well. So here we're going to use the basic template page. We're going to create a two-page process. We're going to build and add a query string to hyperlinks. And then we're going to use that URL variable information on the second page. This way you can see how to work with it. So I'm going to put this page in the browser, and I'm not going to click this link necessarily. I can hover over it. So to test your hyperlinks or your query strings once you've added them, if you hover over it, you can see in the bottom left right below my example here, when I hover over it, you can see that it has a question mark with some additional information after that question mark. That's what I'm referencing when I talk about 4 characters right here. So we'll take a look at that, and if I hover on it again, you'll see it says question mark. The left side of the question mark is the actual URL. The right side of the question mark is the information the next page is going to use. The way it references it is this has 2 pieces of information. Tour ID equals 3 and country equals Mexico. So tour ID and country, those specific words are now variable names on the next page, and they have values of 3 and Mexico. So let's get on with actually creating this, and I think it'll make a little more sense. Just keep in mind there are 4 characters we're going to be using. question mark, ampersand, equal, and plus sign, and this is what they represent should you need to reference it later. So let's get building a two-page process using URL variables. We are now going to build a two-page process that uses URL variables. And I have these pages set up for you, so if you want to follow along with me, it's URL click and URL display. So let's take a look at the click page first. This is dealing with pets, and the idea behind this is the user opens up this page and they click a link for their favorite pet, and there are 6 different ones here. Once the user clicks on a link, such as the dog link, the next page is going to say a dog is your favorite pet, and everywhere there are these X's, we're going to drop in whatever this word is onto the next page. This one has an extra S purposely. You'll see why once we set this up. So how do we create this? Well, this whole piece is all set up. So let's get working with this one so we can get the data over to this second page through a query string, and then we'll set up the second page to display that information. And we're going to use some Dreamweaver features to do this. Now, the way I created this interface here was I closed up all of the panels by going to Window, Show Panels, and then I went out to Window, and let's see, where is that located? It's such habit for me, right here in front of my face. I did the tile vertically. Now, if you are on the Mac side, you probably just have a single tile option, not a horizontal versus vertical. So, subtle difference between the Mac and PC. If you're on the Windows side and you put your interface in this particular manner, you'll have a tough time getting it back to tabs. The way you get it back to tabs is by clicking this middle link, Maximize. I'll click that, it pops right back into tab view for both pages. So I'm just trying to kind of gradually move you into getting a feel for working with the Dreamweaver panels. Now let's take a look at our hyperlinks and how this page is set up in Code View. And if I go into Code View, you'll see we're using the includes on this page to pull in the header and footer. I also have some information inside of an HTML comment here, and we're going to use that so you don't have to sit and watch me do quite so much typing. This is a completed version of this page in terms of setting up the query string. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll get these copied over to set this all up so we can move to page 2 and display it. So here is our query string. Notice the left-hand side is our hyperlink. Our hyperlinks are all set up right here already for you, along with the words. So what we need to do is add the query string piece. So I'm going to add a question mark. Then following the question mark, I'm going to put pet equals, and whatever the pet is going to go after the equal sign. So for the cat link, I'm going to say pet equals cat. For the bird link, it's going to say pet equals bird. This all goes right after the question mark. Now I also have a second query string on here that we're going to use as well. So these characters represent an ampersand in HTML, and it actually creates ASCII characters. So that ampersand, AMP, semicolon, is the ASCII character equivalent of the ampersand. If I put this into design view and I uncommented it, you'd be able to see that. Just trust me on that one. Feel free to uncomment these. These are HTML comments. You can uncomment them by simply selecting all of that and clicking Remove Comment. Now, after this ampersand, we have description equals man's best friend. Now, notice there's a plus sign between these words. Within a URL, you should not have spaces. If you're on certain types of web servers, it won't honor that necessarily. So we use a space to represent that information. So let's add one of these so you can get a better idea of how to use it. So I'm going to take the query string portion, which is everything, including the question mark. I'm going to copy that and paste it right after the P in PHP. So I'll do a paste right here using Control V or Command V. I'll start doing that. It's a little bit quicker for me than right-clicking to do paste all the time. And here is my question mark. Pet equals dog. Description equals man's best friend. So let's test it out just for this first one. It's usually a good idea to test things once you've done one instead of copying that mistake 6 times. So I don't need to click the link to test this. What I'm going to do is simply hover over it. And you'll see down below, right down in this corner of the page here, when I hover over it, you can see, yes, it's passing that information. So let's go ahead and finish that up for the other 5 pages. So I'll copy this. This is a cat. The description is furry. So I'll paste this one in. So I'm simply doing a copy and paste from the question mark right up to that double quote. Aren't you glad you're not having to watch me type all this? So feel free to uncomment this out if you don't want to go through pasting. I want you to see this particular process so you can recognize the regular basic link and also the query string portion, because sometimes these get a bit lengthy and it gets a bit confusing to take a look at them. You kind of have to chop them up into pieces. Okay, chameleon. This particular one is added here because my son had a chameleon for a while, but I'm sorry, he has passed into another world. So he is no longer with us, so I put this up in his honor. Anyway, let's put this in the browser and see what we have. So, pet equals dog, pet equals cat, bird is chirpy, hamster is cute, bunny is soft, and chameleon is fascinating. I wasn't quite sure what to put for a chameleon. I've never really been fascinated with them, but my son was. So our page is all set up. We have our query string. When I click the link, it's going to take me to URL display. So let's move out to that page and see what we need to do here. And for this page, we can stay in design view. We're going to use a Dreamweaver interface feature that'll make this process really simple. So I know I'm passing 2 pieces of information to this page. The first one is called pet, and the second one is called description. So I'm going to use those 2 words on page 2. We are now going to take a look at setting up a URL variable in Dreamweaver here, and we need a new panel to do that. And the panel I need to open is the Bindings panel. So I'm going to double-click CSS Styles, and I'm going to double-click Bindings, and that will open it up. Now make sure you have 3 check marks right here. That means that your testing server is understood by Dreamweaver. And I've had some issues in terms of just recognizing that even though it's set up. So should you have any issues, this may be a Windows 7 thing, I'm not sure. But if you click on testing server, you should see check marks in these 2 areas and also this way. Just click save again, and quite often this little check mark will show up. So it's just a funny little quirk in case you have any trouble. So all 3 are checked. We know there's a testing server and Dreamweaver recognizes it. So I'll hit the plus sign in the Bindings panel. And the Bindings panel is a way for Dreamweaver to create variables for you. And the variable type we want to create is a URL variable. Now, when you use this Bindings panel, you are only creating that particular variable on the page that's showing. So we need to make sure we're on the URL display page. This is the page that's going to get those URL variables, and we'll display them here. So select URL variable. And the first one we have is named pet. We put pet equals after the question mark in our query string. So we're going to set up pet I'm also going to create another one by hitting the plus sign, URL variable, and this one is going to be description. So Dreamweaver is creating the code for us for this URL variable. Now this is where it gets interesting and very simple. I'm going to select these two X's. I put these in to represent a location where we need to place a variable. So it makes it easier for me to recognize it. I can build the page, and then as soon as I open it, I know where I need to add information. So what I'm going to do is select those two X's. I'm going to come over to Pet, and I'm going to click Insert. If those are selected before I click Insert, Dreamweaver will replace those X's. As you can see, notice it says url.pet. Now that is just representing a URL variable. When this page is previewed and we start at the initial page, URL click, that information will be passed to here and it will be displayed. So let's just continue doing this. These two X's here, I'll represent those and do the same thing. That's my pet. You like, this represents pet as well. So select pet and insert. Now you can see why I added the S. And these last two X's are going to be our description. So select description, click insert. Now if we look in code view, Dreamweaver has added a fair amount of information within this section. Now I certainly could have just typed this in, but since we're using Dreamweaver, let's let Dreamweaver do the work for us. Notice these are individual PHP code blocks that PHP will represent and process. And here is our echo, which means write to the page. And the way you represent a URL variable is not with just a plain $ in the word, like our regular local variables we used earlier, but it's an underscore get. So a URL variable is a get type variable in PHP, and we do need the underscore in there. Inside of here goes whatever the variable name is. So here it says pet, pet, pet. Actually, it's way over here. And here we have description. So let's preview this two-page process now that we have it set up. I'll go over to URL click. You must click one of these links to create that variable. So I'll preview. I'll click on dog, and it says a dog is your favorite pet. A dog. Oops, we need an extra space in here. We'll have to fix that. You'll find those little things happen as you're working in these variables. So you just go back and add a space. You like dogs. That's why I added the S, because they are. Here's our second variable, man's best friend. If I go back and click cat, it says cat, and they're furry. Bird says bird, etc. So let's go back and fix our spacing issue. Now it's after the word like on our display page. And you can see this code is right up against the E. So all I need to do is put a space in there, save the page. We'll re-preview. And let me talk about re-previewing that page in just a second. But let's make sure that our space has been fixed. And there it is. Okay, now about previewing this page. If I go to preview URL display, you'll see nothing shows. I don't get an error because errors are turned off in PHP, at least by default. So we don't get a PHP error. We just get a goofy looking page. So ultimately, what we want to do is test this page and make sure that these variables are passed before we try and use them. And we can do a redirect to do that, and we'll take a look at a redirect later. So ultimately, I would want to add a little more coding to this page, testing to see if this variable called pet has been defined or not. If it has, we'll display the page. If it hasn't, we'll send them back to URL click using a redirect. But we'll do that coming up here. So let's take a look at URL click one last time. I'll put it in the browser, click on Bunny, and I'll just test all of these. I have one more to test. And there we are. So that is working with a URL variable, creating it using a query string, and displaying it using the bindings panel in Dreamweaver, and creating URL variables here to let Dreamweaver do our work for us. Don't you love Dreamweaver that way? I'm going to be showing you a lot more features similar to this, where Dreamweaver really makes it simple, or at least speeds up the process of dynamic web development. We are now going to take a look at dynamic variables and plugging those into the URL as a URL variable. So what am I talking about? Well, what I mean is right now we have our pet hard-coded. But what if there's something on the page sitting somewhere where I get some information from the user about what pet they want, and I want to take that information that's saved in computer memory and plug it into this area? How can I let PHP figure out what this value is instead of my hard coding each individual animal? So the first thing we need to do is we need to define a PHP variable so we can play with this. So we'll go out here and we're simply going to say pet equals kangaroo. And since it's just text on the right-hand side, we need it in double quotes. Now notice I'm getting this syntax error. This is a new feature as of Dreamweaver CS5 and 5.5. So if you're using an earlier version, you won't have this little trigger right here, but it kind of lets me know that I have an error. And the error is local variables I create just by putting the name down, must have a $sign in front of them in PHP. And that's why we were getting the error. Now you can see there's no errors. So I have this particular variable here. It's been put into computer memory as $pet. How can I work with it here? Well, first of all, we need to change this code. So I'm going to delete the word dog, and I'm going to put another PHP code block. So you just drop PHP code blocks wherever you need PHP to process. So let's plug in our variable name. Now I simply put the $sign, and this is known as code hints. And any variables we've created, beginning in version CS5 anyway, of Dreamweaver, it will recognize in our code hints. You can certainly use these without a problem in prior versions of Dreamweaver, but this is one of the areas where Dreamweaver has drastically improved beginning with version CS5. So I'll plug in pet just by double-clicking it, and let's see what happens with our page. I'll put it out in the browser. I go to hover on top of it, and notice down below what it says. If I click this, there's no variable called dog or kangaroo or any other animal. Notice our pet equals right in between here where the variable is supposed to go. It's completely blank. We told PHP to process it, but it didn't happen. Why did that occur? Well, what we actually have to do here is, since this is a HTML hyperlink, what we have to do is tell PHP to print this or output it into this area. And the way we printed our first name and last name earlier in the course is we used echo. And that tells PHP to print the value of this variable right here. So I'll save it. Let's put it back in the browser. And when I hover over dog, it now says pet equals kangaroo. And if I click on it, it plugs in kangaroo. So I don't necessarily want a kangaroo in the dog spot, but just to show you how to work with a dynamic variable. Now I could certainly do the same thing and set this to a get variable. So we can work with it the same way we used get on this page. We have our echo get. Notice that echo word is in here too, telling it to output that to the browser. So that word echo is telling PHP, print this out to the browser, and that's exactly what it's doing. So I could plug this in on the other page and just use $. Let me show you. I'll copy this piece. I'm going to define that. So instead of $pet, I'll use a get method variable, and I'll also populate that here. Save the page. So I'm defining a variable with this particular name, and I'm outputting it. So this should work exactly like our local variable did, pet equals kangaroo, pet equals kangaroo. So that is how you can define a variable and use it elsewhere on the page simply by referencing it as its variable name. So that's how to handle dynamic variables in PHP. For those of you unfamiliar with what a database is, I wanted to kind of take what we had done at the beginning of this course in talking about dynamic page requests and take it down to the database level. So I'll just review this real quickly and then we'll take it from there. So in a dynamic web page request process, the request starts at the user, makes a request of the server, and then the server only speaks HTML. So if there's a server-side language involved, this is where it resides. And the web server, all it does is serve up pages back and forth. So any processing in PHP, Cold Fusion, ASP, it doesn't matter which server-side language, that all happens over here outside of the web server. Now, it is possible to have these two kind of combined within a single web server, but the idea is it's a separate process that does the actual processing of our PHP code, and that PHP is what communicates with the database. So if we dig a little bit deeper in terms of the database piece, how does this communication happen? I do have another slide to show you that piece, and in this slide, what it does, this one is a little bit more specific to the Windows side of things, using ODBC or JDBC if you're in Cold Fusion. But the concept is the same. So here's a request to the server. So somebody's out there on the internet requesting a web page. Here is the web server. The web server says, I don't speak PHP. So it moves out to the application server layer here. And this server layer is what communicates with the database. Now, in some languages, there is a little process that needs to occur within here, but you can think of this ODBC layer as the actual connection information. So our application server layer in this example would be PHP, and PHP needs information in order to connect with the database side over here. So this ODBC layer that I'm referencing in this slide, specific to Windows, is really just how do we store the information in PHP to connect to the database. Now, on the database side of things, what the database is simply a grouping of tables. Those tables have what's known as relationships between them so that you can pull data out of multiple tables. So we don't get into creating databases within this course. The assumption is the database has already been created. But what we have to understand is the database table structure so we can communicate and pull information out of those tables as needed. That information will come back to PHP, and this will be your connection area, storing the connection information of, okay, where is my database located and what type of database is it? And that's really all this does. PHP over here in the application server layer will be the one to take that database data, put it onto our web page in HTML manner, send the HTML to the web server, who spits it out, so to speak, to the browser. So ultimately, it goes this direction and then right back so the user can get that database information printed onto their web page. Now, in terms of databases themselves, I do have a SQL area on my website for some resources. How you set up your database, there are some normalization rules, and that connections diagram we just looked at is listed here if you want to look at it a little further. What we're going to do next is go out to the PHP My Admin area. And I got to this area through the control panel, and within the control panel, there is an admin access. As long as it's running, I can reach admin. I click this button in XAMPP. There's also an admin button or admin section to access the admin in MAMP. Once I click that or select the admin area for the database, it takes us out to PHP My Admin. Now, here are all the individual databases we have set up. These are pre-built. When we install PHP through these various testing server environments, this is the PHP portion. So I'm not going to modify anything in here. But here's the database. This is a listing of all of the tables. Inside the tables, these are all the individual fields within a table. So if I click on the table, this shows me the basic header columns, so to speak, of a table. If I wanted to view the information inside the table, I can click the Browse button. Now notice when I hover over the Browse, it says Table seems to be empty. PHP is not going to allow me to access that information. So let's see if I go out to this database. Here is my database structure. So these are all the tables. There's 28 tables in this database. That's the structure area. If I select one of these tables, it shows me the individual columns within the table, and those columns are referred to as fields. If I browse in this particular item or this table, I get the same information. So these are all pre-built. The system needs those in order to run. Here is our database, and we actually have some data inside here. So if I click in the countries table, you'll see I get a listing of the countries. So the Browse button allows you to see the data inside the table. If I wanted to get an idea of the structure of the table, in other words, this table has 2 columns of data, I can go in here. Here's the information setting up those columns. So we're not really going to cover the database side of things. I just wanted to get you a little bit familiar with what a database is. We'll be modifying these using forms. So we don't need to come in here and modify anything. It's all set up for you. So that is the PHP My Admin area to manage our MySQL database, and just a little bit of background about databases and how it all ties together in a dynamic web environment. We are now going to take a look at the database we're going to be using for this course. My assumption is that you have installed Dreamweaver, you've installed XAMPP, you have set up your testing server environment, you have made Dreamweaver aware of your testing environment. In other words, you've gone through all of the setup movies for this course and were able to view it within Dreamweaver. So let's take a look at how we can do that. Now, this Databases tab I have open. To open and close tabs, you just double-click them in Dreamweaver. So I'm going to have my Files panel showing. I'm also going to have this Databases Bindings and Server Behaviors panel showing. Now, these will be grayed out, any panel but the Files panel, when you don't have a page open. So I'm going to open up the About Us page. You can see how it activates my Databases panel. So I want to make sure that all 3 of these items have a check mark. If your testing server does not have a check mark, you can click the refresh button here, provided you've gone through all of the other installation sections of this course. And in case you have defined it and everything should be set up correctly, and you're not getting this 3rd check mark, click the testing server. It takes you out to your site setup, and if you make sure all 4 of these have green check marks, click Save. that might refresh this area so you get a check mark here. Now what we're going to do is set up our database connection. In my site files right now, the only folder I have at this point is the images folder. On the PC side in Dreamweaver, the folders show all together. On the Mac side, yours may be scattered and simply be in alphabetical order. So if you're on the Mac side, don't let that throw you. But notice there is only an images folder so far in our site files. If I open up the Databases tab, I'm going to click the plus sign and say MySQL Connection. We're going to create a connection to the database from within Dreamweaver. What that's going to do is add a new folder down in our site files called Connections. And that does need to be on your web server. What that does is tell PHP where your database is located and how to connect to it. So I'm going to set up a MySQL connection. We're going to call this connection CONN, standing for connection, and this is going to be called unique. My SQL server is localhost. Now, I just did the basic default install of MySQL. I did not complicate things by making us a separate user of the main root user. So what I'm saying is, the way we have MySQL set up now, you'd never move into production. You'd want to make sure that you have a separate username and password set up just for accessing the database through the website. But we don't have that. I didn't worry about that piece for development. So our username is going to be root. We have no password right now, so that's really kind of a security issue, but not when we're working locally. I'm going to click Select, this Select button. If you have any difficulty working with this, cancel out of this and make sure you get the testing server set up working correctly first. That's the only reason you would have trouble in here. I'm going to select the database. These are all of the databases that are on my web server. Click OK. I'll click the Test button, and you will get this message. This is letting you know that a production MySQL environment would need a password to access the database. I'm not going to worry about that for my development environment here, so I'll just click OK. Doesn't mean anything's wrong with your information. It's just giving you a notice, you know what? Don't forget to set this to a separate user when this process moves on to a full live web server. Click OK, and you should see ConUnique now listed as a database in your Databases panel in Dreamweaver. This is a really handy feature. If I click the plus sign in front of tables, and on the Mac side, these pluses and minuses tend to be arrows to the right or down, so yours may look a little bit different on the Mac side. But here are my tables. I have 4 tables inside this database. Let's take a look at the countries table. If I click the plus in front of that, I have 2 columns, or they're known as fields in a database, country ID and country name. This shows me what type of data that is in the database and how many characters. This becomes important when we create forms to insert data into the database. We don't want to try and insert 60 characters into a database field that will only hold 50. The database will return an error, and it won't let us insert it because the database won't know what to do with the extra characters. Here's our tours database and all of the fields inside that table. Now, to view the actual data, because these are just the columns in the table, to view the data, you right-click, View Data. So I'm right-clicking the table name. I'm not right-clicking a field in the table. The table itself, right-click, View Data, and here is the information for our tours. So here's a listing of all of our tours. These are the first 25. We'll click Next 25. You can see you can access the data this way. I cannot edit the data, but I can view the data. Now this does not expand at all. So if you want to view more of this, you do need to move it in between the columns, and then you can scroll this way. So here's our meals, non-diver cost, days of diving, total days. So these are all of the tours that Unique Vacations offers. Here's the actual name and description. And these are also listed on the tours.php page in your site files. So that is how you can view database table data by right-clicking the table name. You can also open up this area so you can preview and see what the field names are inside each table. Now this area does not allow us to set or edit data in any way. So when you create the database initially, that's when you set up your keys, your primary and foreign key, to create a relationship between tables. And that is also where you would set up and create the information for the table itself, all of the fields within the table. So we're just being able to view it here, but it comes in handy when you're creating forms to insert data into a database, to be able to look at the different fields, what they're named, how many characters, comes in very handy. So that's the Databases tab and viewing your database from within Dreamweaver. So what is SQL? SQL actually represents the letters SQL, standing for Structured Query Language. And there are 4 main SQL statements. Those are the typical statements you're going to work with. They are select, insert, update, and delete. What we're going to do during this course is let Dreamweaver do most of that work for us. But I'll move up and open up About Us just so we have an active page. You'll see once I have an active page, I have access to the database information. Now there are different ways to create our SQL statements within Dreamweaver. I mentioned we're going to let Dreamweaver do most of that for us. So if we want to pull data out of the database, we go to the Bindings panel. And if I hit the plus sign, a SQL statement to pull data out of the database is known as a record set or a query of the database. We're just pulling data out of the database. You don't need write access to the database itself. It is possible to have difficulty putting data into a database, but be able to pull it out of the database just fine. If that's the case, that means you have read access only. You cannot write new data into the database. You can only read the data that's already stored there. So to pull data out, we use the Bindings panel, and we'll be doing this moving forward. I'm not going to demonstrate it here. We'll actually create some queries or some record sets. In order to do other features within the database, we move out to the Server Behaviors panel. And within this section, this is where we can insert, update, and delete data from a database. So the Server Behaviors allows you to use these 3 SQL statements. The Bindings panel allows you to pull data out of the database. We will be doing examples of working with all 4 of the SQL statements. I just wanted to show you these panels. This one is to pull data out, one of the most common ways to work with the database. When we get to modifying or changing data within a database, we move over to this section. Now, to pull data out of a database, it's known as a select statement. So the 4 options for SQL are select, insert, update, or delete. And we'll be working with those. But since we're having Dreamweaver create those actual SQL statements, we won't be specifically working too much in the code. The code kind of gets buried in what Dreamweaver creates for us, so I wanted to at least mention those 4 statements to you. So let's get working with database data. Well, it's now the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to pull data out of a database. So I'm going to open the getdata.php page. That's the page you're looking at. And what we're going to do is use the record set builder in Dreamweaver and add a query right down in this area on this page. So I'll move that down a little bit so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. Now, in order to create a query to pull data out of the database, I'm going to go over to the Bindings panel. I'm going to hit the plus sign in the Bindings panel, and you may or may not have this particular item in this panel already. Don't worry about it. We're not using this on this page in any way, so it makes no difference in your Dreamweaver environment. We're going to create some new information within this panel. So click the plus sign. What we want to do is build a record set. Now this record set environment, this panel has actually two sections to it. This is known as the simple interface. It allows us to connect to only one table at a time. If I click the advanced interface, what this does is allow me to handwrite my SQL statement. So this is showing you the actual SQL statement in easy-to-read format. So if you're not familiar with SQL and you're just pulling data or working with one table at a time, it's a good idea to move into this. So set up your query in the simple interface, then click on Advanced and view what Dreamweaver created. It'll make you aware of some of the SQL statements, get you familiar with looking at them. You can also, in this advanced interface, create SQL queries down in this area. I'm going to go back to the simple interface. We'll start here. Now I need to name this particular query. Generally speaking, you use a Q in front of whatever your name is. So I'm going to do a Q, and let's see, should we do countries or tables? Let's pull out the countries. So we'll do Q countries. I generally try and describe what it is we're doing. The connection piece, we defined our connection. We have a connection already set up in Dreamweaver. So that's why this one is showing, and it's the only connection we have at this point. If we didn't have one showing in here, we could click this to define one. Now within that database, because this is basically telling PHP which database to access, here are the tables within that database. So make sure the countries table is chosen. Now this piece here, do we want to select everything within that table, or do we want to just select certain things? In the selected, I'm going to check that checkbox. Now you can see I can access these. If I'm in all, Dreamweaver assumes you want everything, so it doesn't let you select them. So I'll go over to selected, click on country name, and down in the sort area, I'm going to sort by country name ascending order. This is going to put our country names in alphabetical order. Now it's always a good idea to test your queries. Make sure it's the right data before you try and work with it. And there's my test. We have 23 countries to which we offer tours, and they're all listed in alphabetical order, just like I asked for. I'll click OK, and I'm going to click OK here. Now, once I do that, Dreamweaver places a record set inside your bindings panel. This is the name of the query, and this is the data coming out. So how do I place this information onto the page once it's in the bindings panel? Well, it doesn't get any simpler than this. Drag country name out onto the page. There's our data. Now I'm going to use live view here for a quick look at our data. I'll click yes. Notice we only get one item pulled in. So there's one other piece I need to set up inside of here using a Dreamweaver server behavior. Anytime you create a query and add it to the page, it's only going to run once. So we need to modify that. I'm going to select that query. And what we need to do is tell PHP, okay, for every country name in our database, you need to repeat printing it to the page. We want every country name printed to the page. So PHP has to do the same request over and over and over and over. In other words, as long as there's another country, print it onto the page. There's quite a bit of code involved in doing that. We have to do something called a looping statement. And so in order to do that real easily, we can use Dreamweaver. Go over to the server behaviors, and as long as you have that country name selected in your design view, I'm going to click the plus sign and say repeat region. In other words, I want to repeat this over and over and over until there aren't any more queries or there isn't any more query data to print. Here's the record set I want to print, and I'm going to say show everything. If I say show only 10 at a time, I need a way to get between the pages, and we know we have more than 10. I'll show you how to do that type of thing in another movie later in the course. So I'll just say all records for here, click OK. You'll see you get this little repeat tab. Now, once you begin to add all of this code, you can see there's little PHP code blocks being added. There's information, a lot of information up at the top of the page that Dreamweaver creates. So it's very important not to dig around in any of this code. There's also a piece at the bottom. So modifying this information, once you add it to the page, just be careful. If I wanted to get rid of that repeat region, I didn't want any of these anymore, I would select it and hit the minus. Let Dreamweaver remove the information for you, because there's little snippets of code throughout your page. Let's take a look in live view. I'll save my changes and look at that. All of our countries are nice and neatly printed on the page. If I take this out to the browser, and for those of you who don't have this live view button in prior versions of Dreamweaver, just take it right to the browser to preview. And there's our web page. We just pulled data out of the database and printed it onto the page. You can see Dreamweaver makes that process so easy. Now, I do have some extra space in here. I had this page opened up a little bit so it didn't look so funny when we first opened the page. So I'll get rid of this extra information just by hitting the backspace or delete key. Let's take a look one last time. Take a look at our page, and that looks much better. So that's how you get database data and let Dreamweaver display it onto the page for you, and also make sure every piece of database data is displayed on the page. Dreamweaver makes this process so easy, it's wonderful. If for some reason your database data did not come out correctly on the page, like mine did, go over, delete the record set by selecting it and hitting the minus, and just start that process over again. Don't try and fight with any of the information on the page. Just go ahead and delete it and do it again. Dreamweaver makes this process so simple that it's just best to start from the beginning. So that is how you pull data from the database and let Dreamweaver display it on your page. I want to talk about a concept called server behaviors. And server behaviors are a Dreamweaver feature. So these are specifically within Dreamweaver to assist you as a user. So I want to give you an overview of what these server behaviors are, how we can work with them, and then we'll move into actually working with them within our pages. So the Server Behaviors tab is how you access server behaviors. Now, in case you do not have this panel open, you can always go to Window and go down to Server Behaviors right here. Any of these panels you can always access through the Window menu. If there's a check mark in front of it, that means it's already open. And our Server Behaviors is open here. Now, just like the rest of our Dreamweaver interface, if you don't have a page open, you won't be able to get an active panel. So I've opened the About Us page so I can show you this panel. It's now an active panel. So what does the Server Behaviors panel do for us? Well, there's a variety of code pieces that Server Behaviors drop onto your pages for you to add dynamic features to your website. If you click the plus sign, you can get an idea of what these server behaviors consist of. There is one here called Repeat Region. We will be working within that server behavior. Once you choose these server behaviors, there's an interface that opens where you make your selections within a Dreamweaver interface instead of having to go into code view and hand type it all. So the repeat region we'll be working in. We'll also take a look at insert record and update record. These allow you to take a form, and when the user clicks the submit button for that form, it will insert data into the database or modify data within the database. The other piece that's a very handy feature to work with is in the user authentication area. And within this section, there are some features specifically designed for logins. And if you go to set up a login, you can log in the user using this server behavior. Each one of these are separate. We can restrict access to pages, so we can make sure only people who are logged in, or even only people who are logged in a particular role, have certain access to pages within our website. Logout user logs out the user, obviously, although in PHP, if you close your browser window, you are also logging out. The check new username makes sure when we insert someone into the database that it's not the same username that somebody else has. So these server behaviors are wonderful Dreamweaver features. They've been built into this program within Dreamweaver since way back in version MX, which is actually version 5 of Dreamweaver. So these are available even if you don't have the latest 1, 2, or even 3 versions of Dreamweaver. This course does not require you to have a specific version of Dreamweaver, or should I say the latest versions. You can go back to MX for this course because all of these features are built in to that same interface. In order to add a server behavior, you would normally select something on the page depending upon the server behavior, or there are a few of these where you don't need to select something on the page in order to work with them. So each server behavior acts just a little bit different, and we'll get familiar with quite a few of these within this course. So let's actually get working within the server behaviors so you can begin to see how these panels work and how nice they are to be able to drop code onto your page. Our course is using PHP as the language, but you can also drop in other languages as well. Cold Fusion and ASP are also supported. So if I had an ASP or Cold Fusion page, I would use the server behaviors in the exact same way. It's just Dreamweaver drops on the syntax for whatever language you have designated. So that is server behaviors within Dreamweaver. We are now going to look at one of my favorite features in Dreamweaver for dynamic development, and that is a dynamic table. Now, I know tables are not supposed to be used for page layout. However, for displaying data, it's still one of the best ways to work with data and display it on a web page. And this feature allows you to do it fairly easily. Let's take a look at how we can set up a dynamic table to display database data. I'm going to go over to the server behaviors area, and within the server behaviors, these are those snippets of code that allow you to create a task. But if you need to do a query to pull data out of the database, we move over to the bindings panel. We need to create a query to pull data out of the database, and then we can put that data that's been pulled out into our table. So in the bindings panel, I'm going to create a record set. So hit the plus sign and choose the very first item, record set. This allows us to build our query Dreamweaver will create all of the code to pull the data out of the database. So I'm going to call this Q Display Tours. We only have a single connection defined here. The connection stores the database. In other words, which database is it and how does PHP access that database in order to get the data. The table we're going to use is based on our database we have displaying here. So we're going to use the Tours table. And within the Tours table, we don't want every column. That'd be a little bit much for our web page. What we're going to do is just pull out the data we need. And that is tour name, description, and total days. If I hold the mouse down while I drag down, it helps me select these right in a row. So in other words, I click on tour name, hold the mouse, and drag down. I'm going to sort these based on tour name, ascending order. In other words, alphabetical order. If I test this, you'll see our tours are displayed in alphabetical order, and there are 27 of them. It's important to take a look at how many are created because we need to determine when we set up the dynamic table how many we're going to display at a time. So we'll click OK. Here's our record set. I'll move this little line over so my name will display. And these are the 3 pieces we pulled out of information from that tours table. Now, the dynamic table, I want to go down in this area. And this dynamic table feature is one that you must be in design view in order to use. You will find that it doesn't always work correctly if you are in code view. So put your cursor where you want the dynamic table to go in design view. And we're going to go up directly under the data tab is a little drop-down arrow, and we want to choose dynamic table. This is going to populate this record set drop-down with whatever record sets are already set up. So you always want to create your record set before you go to display the data in a table. We're going to show 10 records at a time. We have a total of 27. And this is just going to adopt whatever I chose previously. Once the table is created, I can always modify these 3 settings. So I will click OK, and there's our table. Now you can see we have an extra space here. So I'm going to backspace to clear the space. And you may have some extra space underneath the table as well. If so, go ahead and delete that. I'm just going to put an extra single paragraph down here to make a little space under the table. Now this top row in our table is always going to show the information just as it's listed in our database. So what we want to do is customize that a little bit, make it look a little nicer. I'll make these all capital. Add a space between the words. By default, whatever it's named in your database field or column, that is what will be displayed here by default. A quick change to that takes care of it. I'm also going to click in the first cell and drag to the right. And I'm going to hit Control or Command B to make this row bold. That's an accessibility command, so that's always available to you. So Control B as in bold or Command B will convert that entire row to bold text. So let's take a look in live view. Now, if you don't have live view, go directly to the browser. Not a problem. I'm going to save these changes. And there is a listing of the first 10 items in our query. So you can see we have A through D for Dive Cozumel. So I have 10 queries being displayed, or 10 pieces of data from our Display Tours query. So how do I access the rest of that information? Well, we're going to need to add some information to this page in order to do that. I'll put it out in the browser just to make sure we have this displaying correctly. And there is the first 10 items of information being returned from our query. We will take this information and we'll show you how to move users between the 3 pages of query data that we have set up through this dynamic table feature. But that is a dynamic table, and creating them within Dreamweaver, they are a great way to display your database data. We now have our dynamic table built within our web page to display our tours, the tour description, and the total number of days per tour. And I've formatted this just a little bit, making sure this top heading looks nice. If you have not yet created a dynamic table, you will want to go through that exercise and create the dynamic table first. What we're going to be doing is adding a way to navigate amongst the different web pages. Right now we have 27 records being returned from our query, but this first page is only displaying them 10 at a time. So page 1 has 10. How do we get to the next group of 10 records or the last group of 7 records? I told the dynamic table to display them in groups of 10 records at a time or up to 10 records. So how do we get a little navigation area set up? We're going to use another Dreamweaver feature. Now this feature is available in 2 locations within Dreamweaver, but one specific location contains everything we need. So first of all, in the server behaviors area, we are looking for record set paging. That's what we're going to be adding to the bottom of this table, underneath the table. And if I go to record set paging here, notice it allows me to do each one individually, but there isn't anything that will add all 4 of these at the same time. So I prefer to go out to the Data tab up in your Insert bar, and within the Data tab, you have this little piece that looks like angle brackets. And if you hover over it, it says Record Set Paging. If I use the drop-down arrow on this one, I have those 4, the same ones that were listed in Server Behaviors, but I have this top one available. And what this top one does is add all 4 of these at the same time. So this is a little more convenient than doing them one at a time. So my cursor is right where I want that navigation bar to go. I'm going to click on Record Set Navigation Bar, and it's going to ask me, okay, which record set? Well, we only have one, so that part's pretty simple. Now, do I want to display this feature using text or images? I tend to use text, but if you want to use images, what Dreamweaver does is add some little arrows within your website files at the root level. So it's adding 4 GIF images if you choose images. So let me go ahead and choose images so you can see that piece. If I choose text, nothing gets added and it just says some words down here. So I'll explain that once I get the images put up. So I'll click OK. And here are my images. You can see these are little arrows. Now, if you don't like how these arrows look, that's not a problem. You can always insert your own arrows in here. Just let Dreamweaver create the default arrows and replace these images with your own. Now, if I open up my root folder now, you'll see I have these little GIFs. So I have a first, next, previous, and last. And those are the 4 images we're seeing here. There's an extra space here, but I'm going to add something in there in another movie, so I'll leave that space available. Let's take a look at this particular feature. I'll do a Save All. We'll put it out in the browser and see what Dreamweaver did. These are ways to add, this would be next. So if I click that button, I'm now in the D's to G's. Notice I have all 4 of them. Ultimately, what these represent is this is first, this is last, and these are in between. So this is the first group of 10. This is the last group being pulled from our database. And each one of these is set up. So if I'm in, let me go to the last page. If I'm on the last page, it's not going to show me next and last. It's only going to show me previous and first. Now, if I go out and add, I'll do that one more time. You don't need to, but I'll just do it real quick. It's pretty simple. This time I'll display text. And this is what you get if you display text. You just get the words as a hyperlink and you can style them as you need. So I'll delete this whole piece here. And we're down to our basic first, next, previous, and last. As I said, you can always click on this image and replace it. If you wanted to do that, I'd want to open up the Properties area. And what I would do is select the image, and within this section under Source, I would just place a different image. Make sure you're not modifying this link area in any way, or this record set navigation bar will not work correctly. So we have our dynamic table displayed. We also have a space right here where we're going to add another feature. But if we put this into the browser, it allows the user to navigate through our records. The downside is we don't know how many records there are, or what page we're on, or what number of query data pieces, so to speak, in other words, groups of 10, that we are looking at. So that's the extra piece we're going to add right in between these two on our page in another movie. So that is record set paging. At this point, we have our page displaying database data in a dynamic table. We've also added record set paging. What we're going to do now is add one last feature in between these two, and that's going to allow the user to see how many total records there are and where they are in the process. And we'll just walk through this so you can see it visually, and it'll make sense. So my cursor is in between our dynamic table and our record set paging. In terms of working with these two, these were created and added in 2 previous movies. So if you have not done the record set paging or the navigating database data movie or the dynamic table movie, your page will not have these features on them. So I would suggest you go back and start in the dynamic table movie and go through that piece. So we're going to put our cursor in this area between these 2 items, and I'm going to go up to the Data tab, and just to the right of our record set paging, which we already added, I'm going to add this one. It's known as Display Record Count, but it actually looks like a bunch of numbers. And you can think of that as being page numbers in the grouping of your query data. So I'm going to click on that. We have record set navigation status up at the top. This includes all of these. So we'll click that button, and this is what it's going to do. It's going to display this information. So the user will know how many records there are total and which records they are looking at within that grouping. So I'll click OK, and there it is. Now let's put this into live view so you can see it work. Down at the bottom of the page, now the user knows which records they're on. When I click Next, I would be taken to 11 to 20. So let's put it in the browser. It's a little bit easier to work with this type of a feature in the browser. So there's my first 10 records, and it's telling me that. I click Next. Now I'm in records 11 to 20 of 27, and I have all 4 options available. Now you can see why I tend to use the words. I'm not sure every user would understand what these images represent. I could certainly put some alt text on them, but that doesn't always show up in every browser. I'll click Next again, and here's our last grouping. So the user knows once they're in this group, this is the end of all of the tours. So that is the record set navigation bar, and I tend to use kind of all 3 of these features at the same time. So when I build a query and there's quite a bit of data to display using the dynamic table, I'll pull in both of these features. So our dynamic table is in this area in the drop-down directly under Data. I'll cancel out of that. Our record set paging is just to the right of that, and our record set navigation status is over here. So those are 3 different Dreamweaver features that you can use to display query data, and they all work together to make it easy for your user to see where they are in your query data. We are now going to take a look at a great Dreamweaver feature. I have some pages set up for you. Our database is available, and I'll go through what those consist of, and then we'll take a look at how to set up our Unique Vacations website to use this particular feature. The first thing we should take a look at is our 2 pages that will be involved in this process. So the first one is the master.php page. The second one is detail.php. And I named these because the name of this feature is a master detail page set. What Dreamweaver does is pull a whole bunch of server behaviors and built-in Dreamweaver dynamic features into a single interface. As long as you think about in advance what you need for these pages, Dreamweaver does most of the work for you. Before we get to the actual pages, let's take a look at our database. Now the master page, notice it says it's a tour listing. So within our databases, we're going to be working in the tours table. This is the table we will use to populate these 2 pages. Now within our tours table, we have quite a bit of information listed here. And within this area, we have to decide what we want to display on the detail page. Within this master page, what we're going to do is provide a listing of all of the tours that Unique Vacations provides. The user can click on a tour name, as the page states. Once they click on that tour name, the detail page will display all of the details for that tour. This is somewhat similar to the tours and tour detail page. That is a completed look at this process. We are actually going to create it within these 2 pages. So first of all, we need to decide what information out of the database we need on both of these pages. Once we've done that, we query the database for all of that information initially for both pages, and then we just need to tell Dreamweaver what information we want on each page, and it takes care of it for us. So let's take a look at this particular feature. So how do we set up this feature within our page? I am going to go up to the Data tab within Dreamweaver. Now within the Data tab, there are quite a few things that you can do within this area. One of those is this one here, right after the numbers, is something called the Master Detail Page Set. And that's the feature we're going to be using. So my cursor is within the master page. I'm going to click Master Detail Page Set. Now you can see that before inserting this object, we need to create a record set. And Dreamweaver makes us aware of that. So we'll need to go out to the Bindings panel and pull out a query of our database before we can set up this master detail page set. So let's go do that. I'll go over to the Bindings panel. I'm going to click the plus sign to create a new record set. Within this area, we're going to name our record set Q Master Detail. The connection is our Unique connection, and we know the table is the tours table. Now it's a matter of determining what information within the tours table we need to provide. So I'm going to choose the selected radio button that allows me to choose what we're going to pull out onto these pages. The first thing I need is the tour ID. We're going to use that ID to pass information from our master page to our detail page so that the detail page knows which tour it is we want to display. We're also going to choose tour name, tour description, total days, days diving, diver cost, and let's do meals included. So we'll pull that information out. So we are not choosing live aboard, non-diver cost, or country ID. Now within this area, we are going to set this up so that our tours will be sorted in alphabetical order. So within the sort area, we want to sort based on tour name ascending. That way on our master page, they will all be in alphabetical order. I'll do a quick test, and yes, we have all of our information. If I click Next, this shows me the next group of 25 pieces of data within the database. So I'll click OK. Now that we have our record set created to use on both of these pages, we're going to go ahead and add the master detail page set information. I'm on the master page, so here is where my cursor is located. I'm going to click the Master Detail Page Set feature. Now the idea is this upper portion shows the information that will go on the master page. The detail page will be listed down here. So we need to set this up for each page. What I'm going to do on the master page is only show the tour name. That's all we want to display on the master page. We're going to link to the detail page from the tour name, and the unique key we are going to pass is tour ID. Notice within this area, that's all we have access to. We deleted the rest of the information from the master page, and we're going to show all records. Now the page we're going to use as our detail page is going to be detail.php. And I can just type it in instead of browsing because both of these pages are located within the same folder in our site files. Now within this area, I'm going to subtract the tour ID and leave everything else within here. When I click OK, Dreamweaver is going to do its thing. And here is what its thing is. Now I have an extra space in here that I can eliminate. Let's take a look at what Dreamweaver did using the master detail page set. It has a table of all of our tours, listing our tour name. If we preview this in the browser, it will show all of our tours in a table. If we click that, you can see this is underlined. There's a hyperlink that's going to send the tour ID to our detail page. And this is going to list how many total records. So let's move over to the detail page and take a look at that. Now this is a feature that needs to be used within Design View. And once in a while, you can have some problems with this particular feature. So let's go into Code View and see if we have a table on this page. And we actually do. It's just placed in the wrong location. For some reason, my Design View did not update. What I can do is grab this table and move it up to where it should be. Every once in a while, you'll have this trouble with this feature. So I'm going to take the table that ended up down below, and I simply drag it up into the paragraph. We should now be all set with our design, and there we are. So don't panic if it's not showing immediately. Generally speaking, I don't have this trouble, but should you, I wanted to point it out and use that so you can learn how to correct it. Now what we want to do while we're in this page is let's make this look a little bit nicer. So I'll put a space in. What happens is your field names within your database will always end up being what's listed in the table here. And I'll just go ahead and fix this. You usually need to go in and make these minor modifications once this process has been set up. But this process saves you so much time in having to go in and do all these little individual pieces. And if you look in Code View, once you've added this, you'll be amazed at how much code is in Code View. Now the last piece I'm going to do is I'll select this column, and I can do that using this feature. Select the column. This is known as the table widths. And I'll open up my properties, and I can make that column bold. So that should be pretty well set up. Now over in the master page, I just need to fix tour name. And sometimes it's easier to go into Code View to make these corrections. So there's our tour name. I will select tour name and make it bold. Let's take a look at this entire process in the browser. I'll start on the master page. So we pull out all of the tours that we offer at Unique Vacations. If I click on a tour, I'm taken to the next page that displays that information. Now, we don't have to actually show these tables. If you would rather have them invisible, it's very easy to modify that. If I click on the table tag down here, as long as my cursor's in the table, I can do that. I can set the border to 0. That will eliminate our borders for our table. I can go over to Design View and do the same thing. I have the table tag down here in the tag selector. I'll set border to 0. So you can modify these tables as you need to. It's also aligned center. I may want to move it over. I'll leave the fine-tuning up to you. But let's start here one last time and take a look at what Dreamweaver did for us. There's our information. As I said, from a design standpoint and from a formatting standpoint, I may want to make these left aligned. You can fine-tune as you like. But that is the Dreamweaver Master Detail page set. We are now going to take a look at working in forms. And I wanted to give you a bit of an overview, not just of the form process itself, but also our Contact Us form at Unique Vacations and what that looks like at this point. So if we go out to the Contact Us page, which is the page I have open right now, we'll put it into the browser, and you can see this is a nice looking page. However, it has some things that we want to improve. The user puts in their name and email. There's a listing of only 4 of our tours right now. What we want to do is populate this menu from the database. Users aren't required to choose a tour date right now, which is fine. That's not a big deal in terms of us at Unique Vacations needing that information. Comments, they have an area to write in their comments. But when I click Contact Us, what we're taken to is this Contact Us action page that just prints the information to the page. Now, I didn't fill anything out, so notice no content, no value is listed after these. So what we have is a 2-page process at this point. So I have a Contact Us. Let me close up some of these so you can see. We have a Contact Us, and we have a Contact Us action page. So the Contact Us is our form. On this form, ultimately, we want to populate tour name with database data. So we'll look at that in another movie. We also should make sure that the user has to enter some information in at least some of these fields before moving into this particular piece, and this isn't exactly the correct action page we want to show the user. So just some improvements we can make to our form in Contact Us here. So what does our Contact Us action page look like? Well, let's fill out the form, and I'll do it a little bit more proper this time. So I'll populate this with some information. I'll choose a tour, choose something here, and I will say, I want to book a tour. And let's see what the action page looks like. Now I can click the link, and notice it does populate information here. The topic didn't pull in correctly, so there's another correction that could be made. This form won't be perfect when we're done with it, but I want to show you a few things with regards to forms. So a form is always a 2-page process. There's the form itself, the user clicks the button, and when we go to the action page, something happens here. Now there may also be a 3rd page where the action page does something with the information from the form, and then the user is sent to another page that looks like their website and says thank you for filling out our form and whatever else you want to tell the user. An entire form process could be a 3-page process, or it could be a 2 or 1 page. But either way, we need a form for the user to fill out. We want to make sure that form data is filled out correctly, and then we need some kind of an action page and somewhere something to show the user once they've filled out the form. So I always try and fine-tune the form process, determine how many pages total I'm going to be using before I set up my form piece. Now we're just going to stay with displaying the data for now. Within this course, we just don't have time to get too extensive into working with forms. But I wanted to give you an overview of the various pages that are needed, and we're going to populate the database data into this tour name. We're also going to make sure that the user cannot submit this form without plugging in their name and email. So they can't click and submit this form without a name and email at least. As long as we have that, we can get in contact with them if there's any other issues. So that's kind of where we're heading with our Contact Us form at Unique Vacations, and it gives you an overview of the form process. So let's get modifying this form and working with database data within our forms. In this movie, what we're going to do is modify our menu here so this menu data comes from the information in our database. So this drop-down menu, our database information, will populate that with all of our tours. As we update our tour information with new tours or delete tours, this will automatically update on our website. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, let's take a look at our tours table. And what we need to do is decide what we're going to use for data for that menu. And we do have the tour name listed here, and that is the information that I want the user to be able to see within this menu. So the first thing we need to do is pull that tour name information out of the database. Now, the other piece of information we want is internally, we reference our tours based on tour ID, not tour name. So what I want to receive when the user fills out the form is the tour ID. What I want the user to see when they choose a tour is the name of the tour. So those two pieces of information we need to pull out of the database, and then we can populate this menu with that information. So let's go over to the Bindings panel, and we'll create a record set to pull that information out of the database. So we'll build a record set. We'll call this one Q Tour Menu because we're using it for our tour menu. We only have one connection, the Unique Vacations database, and the table we know is the Tours table. I'm going to click on Selected in the columns because I only want two pieces of data, and I'll hold Control down to select those two. And I want all of our tours to be listed in alphabetical order in our menu. I'll go ahead and test this. There's my tour ID and tour name. This is what the user will see. This is the information we will receive from the user. So I'll click OK on that and OK. Now that we have that record set available to us for the page, what we need to do is take care of this menu here. So first thing first, we need to put inside this area, inside this menu, we need to get rid of the static options. And I'm going to close this out, select my menu, and reopen properties. I did that just to make selecting that menu a little bit easier. So I will go out and click List Values now that I have that menu selected, and simply hit the minus sign to get rid of these static options. This is where we want our database data to go. Click OK, and we should now not see anything in this area, and we'll clear out our menu. You can see it's empty. We're now going to populate that with our dynamic data, and this dynamic button will give us access to this record set. So click Dynamic. What we're going to do is choose that record set, Q Tour Menu. The value is going to be the tour ID. That's the information we want to receive. The label will be tour name. Now I need to select that value from my record set, so I'll click this, choose tour ID, and you can see there's some coding put down here. I'll click OK. That coding pops into this area, and we will click OK one more time. Our menu should be set. let's take a look at our menu. Now, you're not going to see anything occur in Dreamweaver, specifically in Design View. So let's take it right out to the browser, and there's our menu information. So we just populated our tour name with all of the tours within the database. And if I go ahead and select a tour, I'll fill this out and say, I want more information. I'll click Contact Us, and our tour name should go in here. But right now, this is listed as topic. So there's a correction. This form has been modified, so we need to plug in tour name here if we're going to print this out to the page to the user. So topic needs to be changed and modified, and we would have to do that anyway, so we can go back and modify that piece. But I'm going to look at the action page in a separate movie. All we wanted to do in this movie was set up our tour name and pull it from the database. Now, as long as our database is up to date, so is our menu in our contact form. We're going to take a look at correcting some output in the action page for the Contact Us area within the Unique Vacations website. And right now, let me show you where we're at in terms of this form. So I'll put it in the browser. This is the Contact Us form. And if I add data to this form, I choose a tour, fill out the form, and I'll just say hello, so you don't have to watch me type. Click Contact Us. You can see we have a little problem with this area. This form was set up to work with topic, and what we actually want to print out here is our menu listing our tours, and we want to have the tour name printed out from the user. So let's go in and fix this piece, and we can adjust it. And at the same time, we'll take a look at the Contact Us action. So our menu information is actually completely correct. The problem is on our action page. Now our action page, let me close up this properties area so you can see a little better. This action page is testing to see if a tour date is set. If the user chose a tour date, and those are our checkboxes, what it's going to do in PHP is put that into an array. Because the checkboxes are multiple items, we're not controlling how many they can choose. So what we need to do for PHP to understand that is to set it up this way. Now we're looking at a lot of pure PHP code, which we haven't done too much. But just know that this is going to take the multiple options that could have occurred. In other words, the user could have checked multiple checkboxes and move it into a multiple item variable in PHP, and that's known as an array. So then it's going to print this information out. Now, the reason we're not getting the tour name is because it's still listed as topic. If I go back to my menu, what I need to do is have it listed as tour name. You can see down at the very bottom here in the tag selector, right where my cursor is, right below it, it says tour name. That's the name of this menu. So I need to spell that out exactly as that is in the action. So I need to change topic to tour name, and I need to change this to read tour name as well. Now this one, we're actually going to see. This one is whatever the tour is that's coming from the menu. So we'll save this page. We'll go back to our Contact Us page. That's where everything starts. And I'll go ahead and choose this one more time. Pick a tour. Choose this. And we'll say hello one more time. Click Contact Us. And now you can see we're getting the ID for the tour as we should be. So it was simply a matter of this information not matching our form information. But now you have a simple script for printing out information from a form. And that's about as much time as we have to work with actual action scripts for a form. But I wanted to make sure we had a fully functional one. So the echo word tells PHP, print this onto the page. And what it's doing is printing the options that the user put into the name field on the form, the email field on the form, tour name on the form, etc. So our Contact Us action is back in action, so to speak, and we can move on, taking a look at some other PHP options and working with other types of forms. We are now going to go back to 2 pages that had been used in a prior section of this course. And what I want to do is add a couple of features in PHP that you will end up needing to know about if you're going to be building dynamic pages. And a lot of what we've done so far within this course is using a lot of Dreamweaver features. But there does come a point when you're working in PHP code and you do have to understand how to create PHP code. So we're going to do that within this section. Now I have 2 pages open, URL click and URL display. And this is a 2-page process. Let me show you what this page does right now. So the idea is you start on the URL click page, and if I click cat, it's going to list a cat is my favorite pet. If I click dog, right now it lists that dog is a kangaroo. And that's something that was modified. We'll change that one as well, put it back to where it should be. I click bird and it shows bird. So we're passing a URL variable through a hyperlink to a second page in the process, and that second page is printing it out. What we need to do is make sure that this doesn't happen. The user goes to the display page, tries to preview it, and it looks rather funny because our information, the URL variable, is not coming in because the user didn't start on the other page. They came directly to the second page in the 2-page process. I want to make sure if anybody does come to this page, that this page sends them back to the correct page. So they will never see this type of a page. So how do we set that up? Well, first of all, this page requires a URL variable. So on our display page, what we can do is say, if there isn't a URL variable called pet, we can send them back to URL click automatically, and the user won't even know that occurred. So let's fix the dog and not have it a kangaroo anymore. Now, in terms of a pet, we're actually assigning this. And where is our kangaroo being assigned? Right here. So we're assigning a pet. And let's just change this to dog, and we should be all set. So we reassigned it in a prior movie. So I'll preview this, and I do need to go to URL click, so that should be fine. When you start working in multi-page processes, sometimes you end up in testing on the wrong page. So I click dog, and it's correctly back to dog. Perfect. All right, now how are we going to make sure that nobody comes to this display page who hasn't come by clicking a link in URL click? We're going to move out to code view to do this. And I'm actually going to put code above the doc type. I don't even want HTML to start to be displayed unless that URL variable called pet is passed. So that's what we're going to test for. And the easiest way for me to do this is to go ahead and just print it out. So I'm going to go to the PHP tab, let PHP enter my code block for me, save me some time, and I can't make any errors if Dreamweaver does it for me. And what we're going to do is an if statement. And what an if statement does is always test to see if a condition is true. So the first thing we need to do is, what is the condition we're going to put inside these parentheses to test if it's true or not? And the condition we're going to test for is there a get variable called pet? So what I can do is simply go down here, copy that from down here. This is what I want to test for. Did the user pass that information? And I'll drop it right in between the 2 parentheses. Now you could see Dreamweaver in these later versions, CS5 and 5.5, lets me know if there's an issue there. Now, if that exists, then I'm going to do something. And the way we say that is we actually want to test and we want to send the user over to URL click if it doesn't exist. So we're going to type an exclamation mark and we're going to put is set in front of our get and then put our get pet inside of parentheses. So what this is going to do is test for this condition. So here's a parentheses, here's a parentheses. It's going to test and see if a variable is set and it's passed as a URL variable called pet. If it's not set, the exclamation mark means not. If it's not set, we want to send the user to URL click. So how do we do that? We're going to use the word header, and in parentheses, we're going to put where we want to send them. So within this header parentheses, where are we going to send them? Well, we need to put a single quote on each side, and we're going to use location, colon, and we're going to put /unique, BAC, /URL, click. This is the page we want to take them to. Now what I'm doing is going back to the name of the website. This is the folder inside of that htdocs folder within your web server. And then inside of that folder is the page we want to send them to. So before any HTML is created, we're going to test, make sure that's passed. If it is not passed, we're going to send them back to URL click. So let's check it out. Now we should be able to just preview this page and end up on URL click, which is exactly what happened. And it happened so fast you don't even realize it. So I go to display, I put it in the browser. What display is going to do at the very top of the page, if there's no variable called pet, then it's going to send me to the other page, and it happens so quickly you don't even see it occur. So that is how you can test to see if a variable exists in PHP in the memory, and if it doesn't, you can send the user to another web page. And that's the start of the process for this two-page piece, passing a URL from one page to another. So there's our redirect. And this is testing to see if a variable exists. Two pieces of code you'll find yourself adding quite often when you're working in dynamic pages. What I want to talk about now is validating form data. And I'm really just going to touch on this topic. This is a rather broad topic, and the types of form validations available for your language, your server-side language, and also the different areas where you can validate do vary quite a bit. So it's a topic that demands far more attention than this one movie. But what I want to do is correct something in our Contact Us form. Right now, our Contact Us form allows the user to submit data with absolutely nothing in the form. And you certainly don't want to allow that. So what I want to do is add some form validation. And what that means is the user must put a name and email address within this form. Now, we're not going to get too intense in that particular process. What we're going to do is use a Dreamweaver feature to do this. And it's known as Dreamweaver behaviors. And this is about as far as form validation can go using the Dreamweaver interface. But since we're working in all the Dreamweaver features, I thought I should show you this one, and it would certainly help correct this issue, at least in the interim. So let's go out and validate the name and email field on our Contact Us form. And where we go to do that is we go up to Window and go down to Behaviors. Now this is a different panel from the server behaviors we've looked at elsewhere through this course. This is just behaviors. And these behaviors are JavaScript. So I'm going to close up my server behaviors panel, and I'll open this up just a little bit bigger so you can see it a little better. Now what a behavior is JavaScript, but we'll let Dreamweaver write the JavaScript for us. So down in our Contact Us form, the way I'm going to add this is the first thing I need to do is select something in the interface. These behaviors get attached to something, and what I want to do is when the user clicks this button, I want the form validation to test and make sure they entered something in the name and email fields. So I'll select the button, go up to the Behaviors panel, hit the plus sign, and what we're going to do is validate form. Now what gets put in here are strictly the text fields within your form. That's about as far as Dreamweaver can take you in terms of form validation. So our name, our email, and this open text area for the comments. Well, we don't need to make those required, but we are going to require a name. So in order to do that, I check the required button. And the R here means I've made it a required field. The email portion, I'm going to make required, but I'm also going to make sure it's an email address. Now this validation only takes you so far. There's no way to guarantee that it's a correct email address, but at least we'll make sure that it has the characters for a correct email address. So it's required. Notice the R on both of them. It also says is email, meaning this form field needs to be an email. Now once I've clicked that button, you can see there is an on-click event. This is what the user has to do. And when that occurs, this is going to run the validate form. So let's go out in the browser. You do need to be in the browser to see this. JavaScript occurs in the browser. And we'll go out to our form and I'll click Contact Us. And notice what we get. Following errors occurred, name is required, and email. So I'll plug in a name. I'll test it again. And it still says email is required. So I'll plug in my email address, click Contact Us, and you can see the form data was submitted. Now I didn't fill out everything, which is why we don't have some values here. I didn't worry about that. But at least we know that the name and address will be filled out. So that's about as far as you can get in working with the Dreamweaver interface with form validation. Anything beyond the scope of what we just completed, you need to do and create and add on your own by hand coding or bringing in some scripts you've used previously to work with form validation. But that is form validation, and these are the two important pieces on this form anyway, so we can now make sure that if the user doesn't enter anything, they will get pop-up messages reminding them to enter their information. So that is validating text fields using Dreamweaver behaviors. We are now going to take a look at how to insert new information into the database. So far, all we've done throughout this course is pull data out. What we want to look at is inserting new data in. Now, I'm not using all of the form fields. It just gets to be a little bit too complicated in terms of trying to do it in a short time frame. Also, when you're trying to do your testing, if you're testing 10 fields instead of 5, you have to fill them out each time you want to test. So just to get the concept, we're going to work with 5 of the 10 fields within this tours table. So the form is set up for you. The fields are here. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind when you're building a form for a database insertion is right now my tour name allows 60 characters. And that's exactly what my database field will allow. So just make sure you're not trying to enter too many characters into your database. So I will go through and double check these. Now our tour description, that allows 255 characters. Tour days, what I've done is put these two into a drop-down menu. That way I can assure that the correct information is being plugged in. Now our total tour days do not go longer than 12. So what I did was put it in a drop-down menu So I don't have to worry about the user picking a particular number or entering it correctly. They just choose one here. I did the same thing with the menu itself. It's either yes or no. So that will populate accordingly. And let's check out my cost per diver. Now, cost per diver is 5 characters. So I've set the width of that to 5 characters. So we know that each one of these fields will match up correctly with our database data. Now, how do we set up the insertion to get this data to go into the database? And Dreamweaver has some server behaviors to help you with that. Now, the real glitch that can occur when inserting data is if you do not have the correct permissions, you may be able to pull data out of the database, but you might not be able to write new data into the database. So inserting database information requires more permissions than just pulling it out. That's known as read and write access. So what we're going to do is use the Insert Record button. We click on that before we set up our server behavior. That tells Dreamweaver that when the user clicks this button, this is what we want to have happen. So I'll click that button. I'll go over to the server behaviors and select Insert Record. Now what's going to happen with this record is it's going to pull in the information from our form. Now I did not give my form a name. I did not set an action for my form. It is a method of post. I'm going to use my con unique, and we're going to choose the tours table. Now you can only enter data into a single table. Notice there's a few of these. It says does not get a value. Some of these are matched up. So here's how this lower section works. What I did was name my form fields the same name as the database information, which I can't show you at the moment. But that's what Dreamweaver is doing, is trying to match these up. So tour name matches up with the form field, form.tourname. Tour description, Dreamweaver matches it up. Total days as a number. Days diving does not get a value. We did not set a form field for it. So we'll just make sure all of these are correct. Days diving, no, that's not in our form. Now, normally you would create a form that has all of these fields. It's just for this course I was not, to save you some time. Diver cost, form diver cost. Non-diver, we don't have that in our form. And meals included is correct. So it looks like everything matched up correctly. What I'm talking about matching is the form field information matching up with the database information. And Dreamweaver matches them up automatically if you name your form fields the same name as your database. If you don't, then this is how you match them up. And this doesn't get a value, so I'll come back to saying none. But days diving, that's the name of my form field, or let's assume it is. What I would do is set it up to match whatever form field. These are all of the form fields in my form. So I just match the two up, so you don't have to name them the same. I just did it so Dreamweaver would match them up. After inserting go to, now we don't really have a page to send them to, so let's bring them back to this page. After inserting, we'll come back to insert. Now normally I would have some kind of a page here that would be a listing of all of the tours so the user could see that yes, definitely their tour was entered. We're not going to do that because I don't have that second page. We're just going to come right back to the same form so we can insert another tour. So I'll click OK. Now notice these turn blue. There's a bunch of information that goes into this form. So let's save it and test it out. We do need to go to the browser to do this. So I'm going to add a tour. Let me say tour. What would be a good new vacation spot for us? Let's tour Fiji. Our description will be dive with the sharks in Fiji. Total tour days, 1 through 12. Let's say it's a 10-day tour. Meals are included, and the cost per diver, what should we say the cost will be? Let's do $18.95. I'll click Insert Record. It takes us right back to this form. We did not get any type of an error. So how do we test to see if the data was inserted into the database? Let's go back to our database, and what we can do is view the data. And this is when this comes in handy. So we'll expand this a little bit. And I now have 28 records. Notice the things I did not fill out got a 0, non-divers. But we were able to insert our additional data into the database. We now have 28 records instead of 27. So that worked beautifully. So the insert record, there are a couple of caveats to it. Make sure you're not trying to insert too much information into the database. And if you have trouble inserting data into the database, make sure that you have right permissions set. The way our course is organized, it's not a problem in the development environment, but sometimes out in a company environment, they have a lot of things locked down. So if you have trouble and you've looked over your code, you know your code is correct, and you're within that type of corporate environment, more than likely you don't have permission to write to the database. And that's nothing you can do anything about. The database administrators have to take care of that for you. So that's how you insert a new tour or insert information into a database using the insert record server behavior. We are now going to take a look at updating database data. That is a little bit different than inserting new data into the database. What we want to do is take the data that's already stored in the database and modify it. I'll close up my properties area down here so you can see this form just a little bit better. Now within this form, we have our tour information, and the idea is we need to populate these fields with the information in the database. But what tour information should go into each of these fields? Well, it should be the tour information for a specific tour. So this page is going to be receiving information from a listing of our tours. So this is where the process will begin. This page is going to list all of our tours in our tours table. And the user will be able to choose, and this will be an admin person within our organization. Now, if I hover over one of these, and you look right down in this area, you'll see that there's a tour ID attached to each one of these. This hyperlink is passing that tour ID to the next page. When I click on this page, we don't have it on the server yet, but this update data page is going to take that tour ID, query the database for that specific tour's information, and put it into the form. Then once we have it showing to the user will be able to change the data, and when they click the form button, so on this page, we'll fill it out based on the tour ID being passed, and then they'll change any of this information within our form, click Update Record, and that will change the data to whatever is listed at that point in time. So the Update List page is really the page that is going to have all the action on it. The Update Tour has already been set up, the hyperlink is there, and the tour ID is being passed. So let's work on this page with creating a URL variable that will capture that information, and then we can use that to query the database to pull out information. So I will close up this behaviors area, and what I want to do is go to the bindings tab. Now within the bindings tab, we need to create a record set, pulling out information from the database. So we'll set that up. But before we do, let's create a URL variable on this page. We're going to do that using tour ID. Our update tour page is sending this page a tour ID. So let's tell this page about it. And what we can do is use that tour ID to query the database. Now that that's set up, we need to create the record set to do this. So we'll go in here, and this is going to be Q get tour info. Connection is we're going to use the unique database The table we're going to select is the tours table. Now what we want to pull out are just the selected fields. So we want to pull out the tour ID. We're going to pull out each one of these fields. So we're going to do tour name, description, days. I'm just matching this up with each one of our form fields. Meals included and diver cost. What we're going to do is filter this information. We're going to take the tour ID. We're going to use the tour ID for this query based on the tour ID being passed in. That's coming from our update tour page as a URL. So we'll pull that in. We don't need to sort because it's only one piece of data. So let's test this process. And in order to do that, we need to provide a tour ID. So I'll put in the number 5, click OK, and we got that exact information coming out of the database. Perfect. So we'll click OK. So we're starting to combine a few of these things we've done throughout the course. Now, how do I get this record set information we pulled out for our tour into these fields? And what we do is use the properties area to do this. This is similar to the menu. If you've gone through the course, you may have done that already. So I'm going to select tour name here. Here's my lightning bolt for that field in the properties area. I'll click on that and notice that's going to be my tour name. So I'll click OK. There's information put in there. Tour description. I'll select this one, hit the dynamic button. That's tour description. So we just go through each form field and populate it based on our information. So this one is going to come from our get tour information. The value is going to be total days. The label is going to be total days. So we're going to put the same information in both of these. And this will be set to tour days. Now our static options here we don't need anymore. So what I'll do is get rid of those. Don't need a listing of all of them. I'll just keep going here. Okay. And meals included, we'll check this one. Our dynamic data is going to populate this one as well. And so we don't need these static ones. This will come out of our database. So get tour ID. And this one is going to be meals included. The label will be meals included. And our value, meals included. Click OK. You'll see the information moves out of here. And our last one is cost per diver. Let's plug that one in. Diver cost. Now let's test and see if this portion is working. And we need to start on the update tour page to get our tour ID. So let's put this into the browser. There's our tour ID. I'll select Antarctica. The tour ID is passed in, and our update data page is not showing up in our local host. So our update, let's make sure that tour name is correct. And I'll go back into the code here. We may have, update data, and it's not update data, it's update list. So we can easily correct that one. All right, we'll put this back in the browser. Click Antarctica, and there it is. It's pulling the data from our database out into this form. Now what I can do is I can modify data. You can see this tour days needs a little correction because I don't have the other information in here anymore. But let's just change the cost. Oh, I'll add a tour description instead. Let's say this dive adventure requires a dry suit. I'll bet it does. Wow, that would be cold. And I'll change meals. Now notice this one needs to be corrected also. So I got rid of all the static options here. We will need to modify that. And let's set this to the price has gone up to $19.99. So what we want to do is look for an extra sentence in Antarctica in our database and a change in our cost to $19.99. Now I selected update record. I don't have anything to update the record. So that's the next piece we need to do. You can see everything sat here just as it was before. So let's go add the update record piece. So I'll go over to Design View and we'll go down here to Update Record. Now this is similar to the Insert Record server behavior. So we're going to go over to the Server Behaviors area, hit the plus sign, and we'll do Update Record. This is going to be our tours table. All of these should match up just fine. And we'll just go through that real quickly, eyeballing it. I name them the same name, so Dreamweaver should take care of this for us. And after updating, we aren't sending them anywhere. This particular area here, we don't need to modify at all. After updating, well, let's send them back to Update Tour. We can use that original page. One column needs to be the primary key. Now, here is the deal with this one. Now, we're getting a message that mentions the primary key. And whenever you update or delete data from a database, you need to pass in the primary key. The reason for that is that primary key identifies the specific row of information you want to change or delete. Right now, our tour ID is not being used. So we need to tell the update piece what record to use. And the easiest way to pass that information in is to put a hidden form field in this form. And you have a variety of locations where you can put it. What I'll do is simply select this button, put my cursor in front of it by hitting the left arrow key. I'm going to go out to the Forms area, and I'm going to select Hidden Field, the third icon here. What this does is allow me to pass in some information to the next page or to a process, and the user cannot modify it. So I'm going to say Tour ID, and the value of that Tour ID is going to come from our Tour ID in the record set. This is why when I built the query, I included this value. So Tour ID will be matched up with whatever the Tour ID is for this specific tour. So now if we do Update Record, we shouldn't have any difficulty. So I'll hit the plus, click on Update Record. This is going to be our tours table. Notice Tour ID selects record from form.tour_id. So that hidden form field is passing in our tour ID. After updating, we will send them once again out to Update Tour. Now we don't get that error message because Dreamweaver knows which row of data we want to update. So let's save the form. We'll put it back out in the browser, and I'll select the same information. Our tour description will be Dive with the Sharks in Fiji. I actually took my son to do that for his 21st birthday. Dive with the Sharks in Fiji. We'll just leave it at that. Total number of days, meals included, cost per diver. Now, what's wrong with what I'm doing? Well, you have to remember, this is not the page I want to start on. So I won't fill any more out. That's why those menus were empty. So I'll go over to the Update Tour page. This is the page I want to start with. So I'll click on Costa Rica. And I'll say, Costa Rica is a beautiful rainforest. And let's change the value. Costa Rica, let's call it Costa Rica Adventures. Sounds much better. And that price has gone up to $999. So we want to look for a name change. I added a sentence in the description, and I changed the cost per diver. Now notice we didn't get any type of error. We're put back here. So let's go look at the database and see if our data was actually changed. I'll right-click the Tours table, View Data, and our tour is now Costa Rica Adventures. Enjoy the quantity of wildlife. And here's my next sentence. This just isn't quite wide enough. Costa Rica is a beautiful rainforest. So you can see my update worked. So we were able to take database data, populate a form with that data, change the data, and insert the new data back into the database. So that is how you can work with Update a Tour and updating any type of database data using a form. Dreamweaver has these server behaviors that make it fairly simple to work with this information. It's a multi-page process, so you do have to remember which page you start on. And yes, these pages could be fine-tuned a bit more, but I wanted to get the main concepts of how to set up, insert, and update for database information. So if you have not viewed the insert movie, you may want to do that. These kind of go hand in hand together. Usually, you want to be able to insert data into a database if you also want to update database data. So that is a very cool feature in Dreamweaver. You just have to understand the process of how to work with it. We're now going to take a look at how to delete a record from the database. And this process is a little bit shorter than some of the other processes we've been doing. So this is just a very quick one to delete a tour. The important piece on a delete is how do we know which tour to delete? And that information is going to come from the database. So let's take a look at the page we're dealing with, and then we'll look at the process we need. So here's our deleted tour. To delete a tour, you just choose a tour and click Delete Tour. Or at least that's what we want to have happen. So each tour in this area, the value for each tour is the tour ID. So we're going to use that tour ID to tell the database which row of information to delete. So let's go look at the database itself. We'll look at the data in the database, and right now we have 28 records. So we know if we're down to 27, it will have been deleted. So let's add the delete record server behavior. So this is fairly similar to the insert server behavior, except there aren't as many fields. So I'll select the button first. I know it's selected because I can see this highlighted right here in the tag selector. I'll go over to the server behaviors area, hit the plus sign, and we're going to go down to delete record. Now, first of all, we want to make sure that the primary key value is defined before we go to delete. The table we're going to work with is the tours table. The primary key is the tour ID. And we're getting that information from a form variable called tour ID. So the name of this menu needs to be tour ID. And after deleting, let's go out to the tours page. That's a listing of all of our tours. And we should not see in that list the tour we deleted. So let's click OK. We'll save our file here and go back out to the browser. Now I'm going to choose a tour to delete, and the one I want to delete is this one. Seems a little cold to me to go diving in Antarctica. People actually do that. Not me, however. And we'll click the Delete Tour button. Now if we go out to our tours page, notice Antarctica is not in the list. So we just deleted that bit of data from the database. If we go out to our database, right-click the tours table and view data, we have our first 25 records and we have our last 2. So that is the delete record server behavior. The important piece is you need to make sure that you tell the delete record server behavior which specific row of data you want to delete, and usually that's done based on some kind of an ID or some way to differentiate between rows. So we passed in the tour ID since each tour has a unique tour ID. So there is the delete record server behavior in Dreamweaver. Thank you for spending the time working with this Dreamweaver course. I'm excited to be your guide in assisting you to move into dynamic website development. Almost every website is a dynamic one, and the transition from static to dynamic is a tough one. As you can see throughout the course, we've worked with many features where Dreamweaver makes that process much easier for you. There does come a point when you really need to move into heavier coding, so I encourage you to begin to look at the code that Dreamweaver creates and start working with your skills in PHP for creating other dynamic websites. So I wish you all the best, and thank you for taking the time to go through this course with me.